TuneIn.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA On Demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
Most at stake. He needs to win tonight. He has everything going his way. I mean, everything going his way. And then the vice president, Joe has to, he has to have a credible finish to get to New Hampshire, where he's got to have another credible finish. It depends on the margins. If he's in fourth place, but he's within 4, that's fine. But if he's in second place and he trails by 8, that's not so fine. So it depends on the margins.
And we keep hearing that this is such an unusual year. Everything from the weather, which has been almost balmy in the last few days, to not the release of the poll. And then, of course, we're living through an impeachment trial. Is this year truly as unusual for somebody who's been through so many of these? And if so, what's unusual? Is it just there's so many people that are so tight in these polls? What's going on?
It is amazing that we still have so many people that are legitimate contenders, but let's not forget we started off with 26 candidates. Right. I think the final number was. I had trouble keeping track. What is very usual that people tend to overlook? Every 4 years, people think they have discovered something new called electability. Electability has been the most important thing as long as I've been involved, which, as we've already pointed out, is forever.
Not to dwell on that.
Not to go back to it unnecessarily. But, I think about half of Iowa doesn't know for sure what they're going to do tonight when they go into that caucus. And it's because they're trying so hard to get this right, so hard to figure out who can beat the current president, because that's what they care the most about.
And can I just follow and say, so with these new rule changes and so many people undecided, is there a possibility in some of these caucuses we see non-committed as something these people are stuck with because they're viable all of a sudden?
Uncommitted.
Or uncommitted.
Yeah, a lot of, I've talked to a number of people the last few days who are going to go caucus for Cory Booker, or who are going to go caucus for Michael Bennett. Or somebody who they are pretty confident won't be viable, so they can still preserve the right to move. Whereas if you go in as uncommitted, as you point out, and it's a very wise observation, that could be a viable group, and then you couldn't move anywhere.
They could get 15%, and all of a sudden they're stuck being uncommitted.
It's been a long time since uncommitted has jumped up, but uncommitted is actually, in the early days of the caucuses, won on caucus night.
Sure. Sticking with that theme, you mentioned a survey earlier. In that survey, 51% had made up their mind, but that means almost half haven't. Is that unusual at this late stage?
It's a little higher than we've seen in the past, but I think it's because they are trying to sort out who can win this thing in the general election. And as you go through our candidates, each of them has challenges. They've all acknowledged that, and that creates indecision in the minds of the voters.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Rick.
In the end of the day, someone's got to win Iowa in the general election. Which candidate who's running in the top tier right now is the best position to do that?
Among the current candidates, and we haven't talked about Bloomberg, who I think every day gets maybe a little closer to being a live threat.
Got to consider him in the top tier now.
Process, not in the first 4 states, but after that, absolutely. Here's what you need to watch for. Is there a muddle in Iowa and New Hampshire, and then the 2 states that follow, Nevada and South Carolina? If there's a muddle, his stock skyrockets as somebody who, because others simply won't have the resources come Super Tuesday.
So the winner of the February contest could be the one guy who's not in it.
That's right.
Okay. Jerry Crawford, Rick Davis, and Jeannie Zaino will be staying with us. And just to remind you, Michael R. Bloomberg is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, which is the parent of Bloomberg News. Coming up, we're going to have much more on the Bloomberg caucuses with Jerry Crawford, Rick Davis, and Jeannie Zaino. This is Bloomberg.
Have you ever thought, I wish I'd had that information sooner?
What does this tell us about the state of deal making?
Let's fix that.
One unprofitable company plus another doesn't make a profitable company.
Carol Mazur.
Talk to us about real-world applications.
Jason Kelly.
Remind us what the potential is for everyday folk.
Bloomberg Business Week.
Vice President of Exploratory Science is one of the cooler titles.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg Business Week, now live on YouTube.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
This is Bloomberg Balance of Power on television and radio. I'm David Weston out in Des Moines, Iowa. We're joined once again by Jerry Crawford, as well as our crack political team of Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis in Des Moines, Iowa. We were just talking about this on the break, though. Let's talk about geography in Iowa. There are particular areas we should look at. I heard, for example, that Pete Buttigieg is really pushing the West.
He has, although my take is that his strongest voting bloc is suburban women. And that could be very important in Polk County. He had a crowd of right at 2,000 last night, right before the Super Bowl. That's a big crowd for a Super Bowl night event on caucus eve. I also haven't been able to figure out who is going to prevail in Cedar Rapids, which is the second largest community in our state. If Buttigieg is doing well in Cedar Rapids as well in this late breaking vote, as this poll today suggests, that's a big deal.
Yeah, you know, one of the things we always used to say on the McCain campaign is ignore the polls and believe your eyes. You know, the polls are all over the map on this one. It has various people in the lead and a lot of different, very tight positioning amongst the top 4 or 5. What are your eyes seeing? I mean, obviously you see that intensity on Buttigieg, but how about Sanders? I mean, some of the stories are that he really isn't putting on a show.
Listen, I think Sanders is going to win tonight. It's not necessarily who I'm for, right, but it's what I think will happen. And I think it would be a big, big loss for him not to win tonight. Any caucus state, not just Iowa, any caucus state leans left. Yeah. He's been running here for 4 years. He has a very built-out organization, has had unlimited resources, financial resources. I mean, he really does need to win tonight. And listen, let me say this about Bernie Sanders. For all the other campaigns, they have to have a really effective organization to get their people to the caucuses tonight, right? You'd need a really effective organization to keep Bernie Sanders people away from the caucuses. They are zealous on his behalf.
So you don't think just because they're young means that they're not going to show up?
Absolutely not. In fact, I think it's just the opposite.
And you were just talking about Bernie Sanders' organization, which he's been building for years. But, you know, you look in 2016 and you look at somebody like Ted Cruz who wins in Iowa digitally. Is there any of that going on? We always talk about Iowa as such a retail state. But is it moving at all or morphing as we talk about these young folks who are so, you know, energized into where you could have a really great digital game and win in Iowa?
You know, I think that everybody heard you or expected you to say that about a year and a half ago because they all have good. Yeah. They all have good digital games. In terms of believing your eyes, last night was a very interesting situation where there was a Joe Biden event and a Buttigieg event within an hour of each other, and I talked to somebody who said everybody who was arriving at one event was taking off their stickers from the other event. Why are they going to all these events? Because 50% are undecided. Still undecided. They're just not out for the entertainment of the evening. They're trying to make up their mind and decide who can we put on the ballot that can get the job done?
Does all the changes this year mean that we're going to have an earlier evening? Do we know the answer earlier?
We will have an earlier
hopefully,
evening.
yeah.
We will have an earlier evening. Of course, the ultimate story will be told by the delegate equivalencies, but we're going to have raw vote total before that'll give us a pretty good glimpse.
It's great. Really a treat to have you with us. That's terrific. Jerry Crawford, he's an attorney and Democratic strategist here in Iowa, has been there all the way back to 72 in the first caucus. Jeannie Zaino and Rick Davis are going to be staying with us for the next hour. And coming up, we will have a second hour live on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Also, there will be special coverage of the Iowa results starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. America's priciest home is finally getting its finishing touches. 7 years after he started working on a 100,000 square foot Bel Air mansion named The One, movie producer turned developer Niall Niami is holding firm on his $500 million asking price. The $500 million home comes with a nightclub, 4 swimming pools, bowling alley, and 360-degree vistas of sun-dappled Southern California. Now the question is, will anyone buy it? Building a mega mansion on spec is precarious enough, but every added amenity and special feature narrows the pool of interested buyers. Pockets and taste only run so deep. In the world of watches, Cartier designs are pretty, well, timeless. But add a chronograph to the Santos squared bezel beauty plus a genius SmartLink bracelet system, and you have a verified hit. Prices start at $9,000 for stainless steel and up to $25,000 for solid rose gold. Visit BloombergPursuits.com for more. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Financial leaders enjoy talking with Tom Keene and Jonathan Ferrum.
What was it like having the giant darken the door every once in a while?
Experts appreciate it when what they have to say is understood.
Do you think that we might have seen a cyclical peak in the labor market?
It's the same reason we're recommending Bloomberg Surveillance to you.
Everything you thought would happen is happening.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Message and data rates may apply. T&C and privacy terms can be found at babbel.com/terms. Please don't text and drive.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then try Babbel for free by texting EXPLORE to 64,000. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
From Des Moines, Iowa, to our television and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. This is Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We are broadcasting today from the Marriott in downtown Des Moines, where in just 7 hours from right now, Iowans across the state will head to caucus locations, 1,861 precincts, actually, kicking off the first contest in the 2020 presidential election. As Democrats search for their candidate to take on President Trump, joining us now is Chief Washington Correspondent Kevin Cirilli, also in downtown Des Moines, but not with us here in the studio. Kevin, what do you have for us?
Well, look, I think a couple of big takeaways for what we're going to be watching for tonight. First and foremost, can frontrunner Senator Bernie Sanders hold and secure victory? If he's able to do that, it will really inject a lot of momentum into his campaign. Meanwhile, what does all this mean for former Vice President Joe Biden? Is he able to pull off an upset and to beat Bernie Sanders? Is he also able to continue to move forward and finish in second place? But lastly, who's going to take the third spot? Is it Biden? That would be a disappointment for him. Or is it going to be South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg? And in fact, he's been talking not about impeachment, but about the economy, the gig economy. Take a listen to what he said yesterday at a rally I was at here in Des Moines.
We're going to be facing an economy profoundly reshaped by the emergence of technology, the role of gig work, things we barely understood just a few years ago. That's why we've got to make sure that we deliver an economy that values work over wealth and protects workers, whether you're a gig worker, a contractor, or an employee. We've got to make work pay in the United States of America.
The stakes are high for Buttigieg. The stakes are high for Amy Klobuchar, as Elizabeth Warren as well. They have to be able to justify that their campaign is going to have the cash and also the momentum heading into these next caucus and primary states.
At the same time, does Bernie Sanders have something at risk here because the expectations are so high for him right now?
No. You know, David, you and I were talking about this morning. Yes, he does, because the Emerson poll that came out just within the last 24 hours, he's leading that poll. Virtually every local newspaper here is writing and covering this as Bernie Sanders' race to lose. And as a result of that, should anything other than a first place finish, that would be an incredible disappointment for his campaign. That said, he is well positioned to have the infrastructure in New Hampshire, a state very close to Vermont geographically, and he also has a lot of small dollar donations. So he'll be able to continue onward. But to your point, from a expectations game, he's really expected to win this thing.
Okay, thank you so much for reporting. That's Chief Washington Correspondent Kevin Cirilli in downtown Des Moines. He's going to be with us throughout the afternoon and the evening, I must say. Joining me now for more on the Iowa caucuses is Jean Hesburgh. She's former executive director of the Iowa Democratic Party, also former Nevada Democratic Party caucus campaign consultant. And still with me, of course, are our great contributors, Bloomberg contributors, Jeannie Zaino of Iona College and Applied Techonomics, and Rick Davis, who managed John McCain's presidential campaign and is now a partner at Stone Court Capital. So, Jean, welcome. Great to have you here. So you know the Democratic Party in this state. What are we looking for tonight?
Well, we're looking for a large turnout.
Are you?
We're looking for, yes, absolutely. I think just the sheer number of candidates means large turnout, but the organizational effort that the Iowa Democratic Party has put into it is large turnout. And the satellite caucuses, large turnout. Everything that the Iowa Democratic Party has done so far means large turnout. And the excitement, looking at the anti-Trump sentiment among Democrats, all of that pushes to large turnout. So that's what I expect to see.
That's great. And also, I wanted to ask you about the change in the rules. This is the first time that you're not going to have an ongoing swirl of activity. You're going to have two votes, basically. And how will that reform the caucuses today?
Well, it should lessen perhaps the confusion in the room with first-round viability. And if you're viable, then you stay in that group. And there's not multiple rounds of viability. There's only 2 rounds of viability. So those people that are viable are locked into that first round, and they can no longer move. And so it's less jockeying around in the room this time. And so there's not as much confusion. And that will really affect those caucus sites that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in them. I think that was kind of hard to do last caucus cycle, and that's what I mean about expecting large turnout. So that will help in that effort. It will also shorten the length of the caucuses. So those people that said, oh, gosh, I don't want to go to a caucus, it might take too long, this will shorten the caucuses considerably. 2 rounds of viability and
maybe increasing turnout too.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. They'll be shorter and zippier, and everyone should come out.
Yeah. And you were saying you first voted in the caucus in 1984,
Absolutely.
And your son is in college and he's voting this year.
He sure
so
is.
In terms of turnout with these young people, which is so important to a Bernie Sanders, are you expecting a large turnout? Because that seems to always be the question. They don't turn out in as large numbers as their older counterparts. But you're expecting that tonight?
Yes, and we always have to remember that caucuses, particularly in Iowa, are about party building. So everything we do about our caucuses is about building the Iowa Democratic Party, looking toward the November elections. So it is important to make the caucus apparatus attractive to younger voters, shortening the length, making the rules a little bit easier to understand. So having candidates that attract younger voters, and I wouldn't just say Bernie Sanders, but all of the candidates we have now have brought excitement to the younger vote. Ultimately, we do lose younger voters in the November election, so hopefully that excitement will continue to the November elections.
Gene, take us inside these caucuses, these precinct captains, as they're called.
Yes.
What are they going to be arguing about? Because we know what the positions are of the candidates. They've been out here an awful lot. Is it really going to come down to who's the most likely to beat Donald Trump come November?
I think so, yes. I'm a precinct captain. So,
there you are.
Yep. I'm going to run my own precinct. My husband and I are precinct captains at a satellite location tonight. And I think that you're asking, I think, two questions, which is undecided voters. Are they going to be looking at electability? And it does sound like that is what the undecided voters are looking at, is electability, correct?
Let's talk about electability. Yeah. Iowa has been historically a battleground state in the general election. Candidates have probably spent more time per capita in this state this year than they're going to do in any other state.
Right.
And so the question is, will Iowa be competitive for Democrats, especially if they nominate someone like Bernie Sanders?
Iowa historically has always been competitive for Democrats. If you look historically about how Iowa votes in the November elections, Iowa's numbers for Democrats actually mirror the numbers of what Democrats receive electorally in November. Whether we elect a Democrat or not is the big question. But I think Iowa should be competitive if we play our cards right, if we do what we're supposed to do in the caucuses. It will increase the strength of the Iowa Democratic Party and increase voter turnout in November.
So what is the number one issue on Democrats' minds this year? You know, the economy is fairly strong. Obviously, you've got a lot of farmers. But what is the issue? Is it electability?
I think so.
You think
beating
so?
Donald Trump in November.
Okay.
Who that candidate is remains to be seen. Number one, beating Donald Trump, and number two is being unified. Whoever wins this whole process, let's unify in the end and get behind that person so we can beat Donald Trump.
You say it's going to be a battleground state, but Iowa went by 9 points for Donald Trump last time. Why are they going to change?
Well, we have to. That's why
optimism on the day of the caucus.
We have a competitive Senate race. We have congressional races. We have our legislature. We have to change. Remember, I worked at the Iowa Democratic Party. It's always optimistic, and we have to change. We don't always have to stay red. We haven't always been red. We have been blue. So I like to think of it as purple.
Okay. Thank you so much to Jean Hesburgh. She's former executive director of the Iowa Democratic Party. Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino will be staying with us, I'm happy to say. In the meantime, let's get a check on the markets. And we have what I understand is a massive rally going on with Tesla. Kaylee Lyons is in New York. Kaylee?
David, that is an accurate description. Right now, we're looking at shares of Tesla up about 16%, at one point up as much as 20%, on pace for its best day since 2013. Right now, the stock is trading at $757 a share, David. Now, there's two parts to this. One is Panasonic, which makes batteries for Tesla, turned a profitable quarter in part because Tesla has been ramping up production so much. So that is a positive sign for the electric car maker. You also had an analyst over at Argus Research raising his price target to $808 today. Of course, we are not far from that right now. David, I want to remind you that the average analyst price target on Tesla is about $467. So this stock has run incredibly far. Just so far in 2020, that's only been a month, the stock is up almost 90%. And since back in October, it has rallied more than 200%. So it's really been an incredible run. And really, Tesla today is helping to lift the NASDAQ 100, which is up by about 1.5% today. And if we flip up the board and take a look at the major equity indices, we'll see that even though, yes, last week was really, really painful, you did have stocks rebounding today with the S&P 500 higher now by about 0.9%. We are, however, off the highs of the session. And the worst performer in the S&P 500 today, David, is the energy sector, really lagging. The sector is now at its lowest since back in December of 2018. And that has everything to do with the declines we're seeing in oil. WTI crude at one point today day, falling below $50 a barrel. We are hovering right now just above that $50 a barrel level. It is down in the past 20 days since the recent highs on January 6th, David, by 20%. And of course, we had Bloomberg reporting today that the coronavirus in China has knocked off China's oil consumption by about 20%. So that has crude much lower today, David.
Okay, thank you so much to KLI's reporting from New York on Tesla. Coming up here, we're going to talk to Fred Hochberg. He's former chairman of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is WBBR New York, WDCH-FM Bowie, Baltimore, Washington, WJZ-FM HD2 Catonsville, WRCA Watertown, WBOS HD2 Brookline, Boston, WNBP Newburyport, KNEW Oakland, KOSF 103.7 FM HD2 San Francisco, and SiriusXM Satellite Radio Channel 119.
Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is an Up Monday here, back to work Monday. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all pushing higher. Stocks are rebounding from the worst week in 6 months. Friday, you recall, the Dow dropped more than 600 points. Investors are assessing whether measures to contain the coronavirus will prevent it from slamming the global economic recovery. Kathy Jones is chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab.
We came into the year thinking we had a mild upturn in global economic indicators. We'd ease the trade tensions with China, the U.S. economy chugging along at a pretty decent rate, the Fed on hold, that there was some room for longer-term yields to trend a little bit higher and the curve to steepen. And now we have to lower the upper end of that to we're probably roughly around 2% rather than the 2.25 to 2.5 where we were before.
And indeed, the 10-year now down 5/32, yield 1.52%. The Dow up 149 points, up 0.5%. S&P up 26, that's a gain of 0.8%, while NASDAQ advancing 116 points, up by 1.3%. Gold down 0.8%, $15.77 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.8%, now $50.65 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, down 2.6%, $55.16 a barrel. After the bell, we will be hearing from Alphabet. Its shares advancing now by 3.1%, $14.78. Tesla now up by 14.5%. Year to date, it's up by 77.9%. Recapping, S&P up 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston out in Des Moines, Iowa for the caucuses being held later on today. And one of the states here in Ohio, this is one of the states most exposed in the United States to trade conflict with China before the signing of the Phase 1 trade deal. Fred Hochberg is the former chairman and president of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. He joins us, but more importantly, he has a great book out called Trade is Not a Four-Letter Word. So, Fred, welcome. Let's talk about trade in Iowa.
Sure.
How important is it? As I understand, you actually researched your book some out here.
I actually came out here because this is an important state, partly because it does a lot of agriculture exports and a lot of farm equipment and construction equipment. So it looks at both sides of our trade, commodities and actually manufactured goods.
How badly was it hurt by the trade conflict with China?
The ag community was really, really badly hurt, very badly hurt. A lot of soybeans wound up rotting in silos. And I think the real tragedy of this, that even this Phase 1 agreement will not fix, is you've lost that customer. And whether they're going to want to put, quote unquote, all their soybeans in one basket and take a chance on selling to China when it's such a volatile and mercurial with our president, whether they're going to take that chance again, I don't know.
One of the things through the negotiations that struck a lot of people was how patient actually the farmers were with President Trump. They really stuck with him. At this point, now that Phase 1 is through, we'll see how much of it gets implemented, even with the coronavirus right now. But do you have a sense that people have forgiven him?
Well, I think the staying with him is they felt this guy's a smart guy. He's a businessman. He's a billionaire, which is one reason why we don't see his tax returns or everything else, because he wants to make sure that that perception isn't changed. So he must be doing it for good economic reasons. So I think a lot of them actually did stick with him. I was quite surprised, and people were having a hard time. Some had to sell off land. couldn't meet their bank loans, and yet they were sticking with the president. So that was kind of remarkable, I thought.
So we got a phase one trade deal with a lot of big promises, I think it's fair to say, on agriculture and other things, equipment and machinery and things like that. Now we have a coronavirus, and we don't know where that goes, how bad it is. There are reports on the Bloomberg today that China may come back and say, you know what, that phase one thing, it's going to take us a little longer. Do you have any sense of the likely effect on trade, U.S.-China trade, global trade, from this coronavirus?
Well, I think one of the things the coronavirus does point out is that we are all interlinked, both on trade, on health, on the environment. So the idea of the U.S. and President Trump going alone, we can make our own trade rules. We don't have to follow the rules on the environment and on trade is really, the coronavirus says, no, that doesn't work anymore. We're much too interconnected as a global economy to try and pull out and walk away and turn our back on trade.
To what extent are farmers out here very conscious about the climate as well? I've heard things about that they really do pay attention, obviously, as farmers need to the climate.
Well, Secretary Vilsack told me there's still some climate issues because he said that when they would survey farmers, something like 80% would say weather patterns have changed my farming. And then the next question is, what about climate? No, climate change is not an issue.
Isn't that, they do not connect the two.
And I think the word climate change became such a toxic word and became so associated with too much progressive and too partisan, as opposed to, of course, they know weather's changing and it's changing their farming patterns, but they don't want to say it's climate change.
So, Fred, you've been out here in Iowa for a while, talking, I suspect, a lot to Democrats, not entirely, but a lot to Democrats. Do you have a sense of what the issues are on caucus goers' mind right now? What do you expect may tilt in one way or the other?
You know, this is hard to read right now, but I would say partly because it's hard to find actually a local citizen right now.
There's so many media.
There's a lot.
That's right.
There's a lot of media, and I met somebody who called himself a political tourist who was in town. I think my sense of the people here, for having been here many times over the years, is they want a solid plan that can be implemented. They don't want just a lot of great ideas and a lot of rhetoric, but they really want to say, can a candidate, can someone actually change things and make my life better? And I think the Democrats as a whole are going to do that.
Well, but when you talk about Democrats and trade, Democrats historically have not been big free traders. If anything, they've been the protectionists. So are there any candidates here that we're looking at in Iowa who are coming up with a trade policy that, to your mind, makes a lot of sense?
Well, I think actually both Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden are much more leaning into trade and realizing we cannot cut off from the rest of the world. I would say that certainly Bernie Sanders is at the extreme in terms of, and Elizabeth Warren, both have said at some level, trade is what ruined this country. Trade is what destroyed jobs. Trade is what's destroyed incomes, destroyed the middle class. And I think that is extreme, and it isn't true. It's simply not true. So I think that, and that's not going to play so well.
At the same time, jobs have been lost. Manufacturing and other jobs have been lost. And neither party, to my way of thinking, has done a particularly strong job in figuring out what to do about that. It may not be the answer, just shut it down, shut trade down. But, okay, if not that, then what?
Well, I do talk about some of this in my book.
I know you do.
And partly, I think we have to look at something called lifelong readiness. We have to tell people and make it clear, not like my parents, where you got one job for 30 years, you got a home with a 30-year mortgage, and at the end you retired, you had a pension, and you lived, quote-unquote, rent-free. That fantasy is over. And I don't think we've really had a very frank and honest conversation with Americans about that. They know that's not the case, but we haven't really leveled with that.
But I'll bring you back to this caucus and the campaign right now. Do you hear that from any candidates? Is that on the agenda?
I have not heard enough about how we're going to really prepare ourselves. Because trade is a small part of it. A bigger part is going to be artificial intelligence, automation, which has had a much bigger impact, frankly, than trade. And one thing about artificial intelligence, automation, it is across the entire country. It has no geographic bounds, no industry bounds. So it's going to be far more pervasive, far more far-reaching.
Is it possible it's a zero-sum game? That, in fact, you are just going to lose certainly good-paying jobs, period?
Well, I think we're going to create a lot of other jobs. I mean,
it will be good-paying jobs?
I mean, here we are. We're at Bloomberg Television, okay? I mean, the entertainment business, movies, television, cable, has created many, many good jobs, and frankly, really good high-paying jobs and good labor union jobs. So we just have to sort of change our view. It's not just going to be with a lunch pail and a factory. That's the 20th century. We do so many things well in the 21st century. People here realize that, and that's what we have to capitalize on.
Really great to have you with us and catch up with you out here in Des Moines, Iowa. That is Fred Hochberg. He's the former chairman and president of the U.S. Export-Import Bank. And as I said, the author of Trade is Not a Four-Letter Word. Still ahead, chasing the youth vote. Part of my conversation with Tanner Halloran. He's Iowa Democratic Party's second vice chair. Why he says Iowa is an exciting state for young voters. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
From the Bloomberg Newsroom in New York, I'm Bob Moon. Bloomberg Balance of Power with David Weston continues in a moment. But first, the day's top headlines. Balance of Power brought to you by Audi. Don't let someone else drive off in the Audi model you've always wanted. Visit a tri-state Audi dealer to get behind the wheel of yours today. A frenzy of last-minute campaigning in Iowa all comes down to tonight. Democratic contender Pete Buttigieg has been packing gymnasiums and spinning what his rivals say is inexperience as a mayor into a selling point.
I know there's some ads on TV saying that this is no time to take a risk on anybody new. But I would say at a moment like this, history has taught us we cannot take the risk of meeting a fundamentally new challenge by falling back on the familiar. We can't be afraid.
Many Iowa voters are still undecided. We'll bring you special coverage of those caucuses with Bloomberg's David Weston live from Des Moines. It starts tonight at 10 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg Radio. Closing arguments in President Trump's impeachment trial are unfolding today, as much for history as any effort to sway votes. Democrat Val Demings of Florida hammering away at Republican denials. She insists Trump is undeniably corrupt.
Innocent people don't try to hide every document and witness, especially those that would clear them. That's what guilty people do.
Final impeachment voting is likely on Wednesday. The coronavirus death toll in China has now reached 362. More than 17,200 people there have been sickened. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Bob Moon. Bloomberg Balance of Power with David Weston continues.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston in Des Moines, Iowa for the caucuses coming up just a few hours from right now. Democratic candidates are sounding right now the last alarm to get their voters out in Iowa before the caucuses tonight. And we're turning to one demographic in particular. They're trying to get the youth vote. I spoke with Tanner Halloran. He's Iowa Democratic Party's second vice chair about their efforts to keep young voters involved beyond tonight's caucuses and more.
Overall, in general, organizing has really changed to create this longevity of making sure that youth come back rather than, we want you to caucus and then we're not going to talk to you again for a while. I think that the way that we're doing this and approaching this is very different so that we do see youth turning out to vote, too, in November.
Why is the Iowa process so complicated?
We're going to need more time to answer that. No, I'm just joking, though. So the Iowa Democratic Party really wants to make this process the most democratic that we can by having it so that everyone is heard. And so, it does look different than other processes, but our process allows that everyone is heard from young to old, different demographics, sex, age, race, you name it. We want to make sure that people's voices are heard.
You particularly are involved in youth engagement, as you said. That's a project you've taken on. One of the issues that's been raised by Iowa is, as wonderful as the state is, it's not the most diverse state in the union. And when you're looking toward a general election, it's a much more diverse electorate. You have a very low, for example, African-American population. I think 3 or 4%, something like that. Can it be a proper indicator of who the president of the United States should be, or the candidate for president of the United States should be?
Yeah, I think we've heard these challenges to the caucus for a while now. One thing I think that we can kind of point to is that again, everyone can have their voice heard in Iowa. There's a lot more pros than there are cons, and I think, again, everyone's voices can be heard. It's easy to buy media space, so you can reach every demographic. You can easily travel the state. Also, just within the Democratic Party, we have the far left, the moderates. Everyone's voices are heard here, and so for candidates, you're really getting a somewhat demographic representation there.
Tanner, you've said you've committed yourself to increasing the engagement of the youth in the process. That's on the Democratic side. I mean, you're part of the Democratic Party. Right. Do you see the same thing going on the other side of the aisle? Are the youth of Iowa also, who are Republicans, more engaged than they have been in the past?
Yeah, I mean, those are separate institutions, of course, and different separate parties. Right. So I don't want to speak to, what they're doing because I'm not as knowledgeable on that. But I definitely think that both parties are kind of starting to realize that, the old guard is going out and the new guard is coming in. So definitely wanting to engage youth to kind of win elections in the future.
You're a college student. What are you seeing on the campus right now in terms of people talking about becoming motivated to act with respect to the election on either side?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of youth are engaged again and starting to pay attention. I know a lot of my friends and peers are excited about the caucus tomorrow. On Drake's campus, 70% of students are from out of state. And, a lot of them are switching their voter registration here because they want to take part in this process. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So a lot of students are becoming engaged. They're paying attention to candidates. They're going to events. And ultimately, I think we're going to see them come out in November as well.
That was Tanner Halloran, Iowa Democratic Party's second vice chair I talked to over the weekend. Joining us tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern Time and 9 p.m. here in Iowa for complete coverage of the Iowa caucus results. Also ahead today, Donald Trump Jr. will sit down with Kevin Cirilli. He's part of the president's surrogates who are here for the caucuses. That's coming up at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, they're all advancing. Stocks rebounding partially from the worst week in 6 months as investors assess whether measures to contain the coronavirus will prevent it from slamming the global economic recovery. Crude is extending losses, down 2% on West Texas Intermediate crude right now, down 105 a barrel at 50.51. We've got Brent crude down 2.9%, 54.96 a barrel. Mountain View-based Google will be among the companies reporting earnings after the close of trading today. Jim Paulson is chief investment strategist at Leuthold Whedon Capital Management. And on Bloomberg Television this morning, he talked about the broader earnings picture for technology.
I realize the values are high, and sometimes you got to hold your nose if you're in them. But certainly the growth in the economy is becoming more and more driven by these areas, and they just sit in the sweet spot where more and more activity is coming, and there's little sign at this point that that's easing up very much. So I guess I expect fairly good results.
And right now, Alphabet shares are up 3.1% at $14.78. Microsoft stock climbing higher today, up by 2%, and so is Satya Nadella's compensation. And with more on that story, here's Bloomberg's Jill Schneider.
The chief executive officer is poised to receive 900,000 shares this week, worth $153 million, thanks to the software company's stock return, which has beaten almost all firms in the S&P 500 over the past half-decade. Microsoft's market value surpassed $1 trillion last year and has kept climbing, buoyed by optimism around its cloud business and expectations that it's a safer bet than other large technology firms that face regulatory scrutiny in Europe and the U.S. Nadella has been at Microsoft for almost 3 decades. Jill Schneider, Bloomberg Radio.
And Microsoft up now by 2%. So far this young year, it is up by 10.1%. The government will be issuing its monthly employment report on Friday, and Wall Street forecasts suggest the labor market is holding up. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Economists are forecasting a respectable gain of 160,000 non-farm jobs in January, though that's below last year's monthly average. Just the same, the Federal Reserve's latest policy statement gives the labor market a strong rating, and unemployment is at a half-century low. Some of the moderation could be tied to labor shortages, and that may have more to do with shifting demographics. Beneath Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
S&P 500 index rebounding today as China adds stimulus in an effort to shore up its economy. Also, U.S. manufacturing data. As we mentioned, U.S. manufacturing data did top estimates. The 10-year down 4/32 with a yield of 1.52%. Gold down 0.7%, 15.78. Right now, the S&P up 24, up 0.7. The Dow up 0.5. NASDAQ up 1.2%. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
From Des Moines, Iowa, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for Bloomberg First Word News. For that, we go to Ritika Gupta in New York. Ritika?
The stock is surging, adding more than $100 per share. It's a fifth day of gains for the electric car maker. Panasonic says its business at making batteries for Tesla at a plant in Nevada turned profitable. Another boost came from analysts at Argus, which raised price targets on Tesla to a street high of $808. House managers are urging the Senate to remove President Trump from office. The impeachment trial convened today to hear closing arguments, with the House managers and Trump's defense each getting 2 hours. After that, the Senate floor will be open for members to explain which way they plan to vote. The final decision is scheduled for 4 p.m. Wednesday, when President Trump is almost certain to be acquitted. Bernie Sanders is seen as the likely winner of the first major test for Democratic presidential contenders. The Iowa caucuses are tonight, and a new Emerson College poll has Sanders winning with 28%, with Joe Biden at 21%. One-time Iowa frontrunner Elizabeth Warren is in a virtual tie for third at 14%. A poll showing tonight could be devastating to her campaign. And the coronavirus outbreak has got China rethinking its growth plans. Bloomberg has learned that Beijing is evaluating whether the target for growth should be lowered. It's part of a broader review of how the government's plans will be affected by the deadly virus. The number of cases of the disease in China has now soared past 17,000. More than 360 people have died. Outside of China, the Philippines has reported the first death. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo wants some assurances from the Taliban. Speaking in Uzbekistan today, Pompeo said he needs to see evidence that the Taliban can and will reduce violence before signing a deal that would lead to Afghanistan peace talks. It would also mean a withdrawal of American troops from the country. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Ritika Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
The Iowa caucuses are the first presidential contest on the calendar, and they're much different than a traditional primary. Democrats operate theirs like this. Caucuses will take place in all of Iowa's 1,678 precincts, plus 99 satellite locations. Once gathered, caucus goers will select their choice of president by splitting into groups. A candidate needs at least 15% of the room to remain viable. Otherwise, their supporters are released and open to select another candidate. And precinct captains will use all manners of persuasion to win additional support. From there, the second and final count is taken. Then the state party calculates how many state delegate equivalents each candidate has won at each caucus location. For the first time, the Iowa Democratic Party will report the results from all rounds of voting, but the key numbers are the state delegate equivalents.
We continue our coverage of the Iowa caucuses now with Dennis Goldford. He is professor of political science at Drake University, and he's the co-author of the Iowa Precinct Caucuses, The Making of a Media Event. He joins us now alongside Bloomberg contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. So, Professor, welcome.
Thank you.
You've persuaded one thing. It is a media event. You've accomplished that. But we just heard a basic explanation of how it works. How did we come up with this contraption? Why are we doing this?
Iowa has always had caucuses since statehood. And originally, they didn't have anything directly to do with presidential politics. Presidential politics got piggybacked onto Iowa caucuses, at least in the modern era, when the people around George McGovern in '72 were looking for some place to make a little bit of a splash. And they did, but not major. But of course, I always say it's Jimmy Carter's fault. So it's purely an historical accident that the caucuses have taken on the role they have. Nobody rationally sat down with a list of criteria and said Iowa is the state we should start in.
And so we hear a lot of criticism in terms of this issue of inclusivity and also this issue in terms of the demographics of Iowa. And so as a fellow political scientist, but also as an Iowan, how do you respond to those sort of criticisms of the caucus today?
I'm often asked, are the people of Iowa all excited about caucuses coming up? And to be a little bit snarky, I say no, and people are stunned, but historically, on average, only about 2 in 10 Iowans bothered to participate in a caucus, if that much, 1 in 5. The big year was the Obama year in 2008 when 2 in 5 showed up, meaning only 3 in 5 didn't. But the caucuses are not a primary election, they're not a general election, they're not run by the state election machinery. They're basically the business meetings of 2 private organizations, the Republican and Democratic parties. And so there's no election or voting window. You have to show up at 7 o'clock on a Monday night in the dead of winter, hoping the babysitter shows up, the kid's not sick, your car starts, and there's no flat tire, and there's no blizzard.
So someone who's run many campaigns for president here in Iowa, what's the future of the Iowa caucus? Because certainly from, I think, a practitioner's point of view, a primary would be perfectly nice here in the frigid state of Iowa in the middle of the winter during election season. And we've seen some changes this cycle. Does somebody like Bernie win in the caucus and potentially going on to become the nominee drive a lot of Democrats to saying, wow, maybe we shouldn't hold it this way?
Well, there's some concerns in that regard because Sanders is someone who is not officially a Democrat and has chosen to remain not a Democrat. But, right. I've always said that Iowa is not first because it's important. Iowa is important because it's first. As you would know as a practitioner, whoever goes first in a serial nomination process has extra impact. And if the 41 delegates, the pledged delegates, matter to the nomination when there are just under 4,000 delegates to that convention, the Democrats have a lot bigger problems than the complexity of the Iowa caucuses. What matters about Iowa is simply that Iowa is an indicator to the rest of the country of what real party activists, not a polling sample, not people on the street that journalists might interview, what they think based upon their interest, concern, and tremendous knowledge of politics, what they think of their menu of possible nominees for the party.
And I was just going to ask you, since your book, which is a fabulous book, what do you think the media traditionally get wrong about the Iowa caucus? If there was one thing you could correct about media coverage of the caucus, what would it be?
I think it's the focus on delegates, because, as I said, the delegates aren't enough to matter. What every candidate runs against in Iowa, and you may have had this experience, expectations. I say every candidate's got the same opponent. That opponent's name is expected. So the key thing is, did you do better than expected or worse than expected? This time around, for example, if Sanders or Warren or Biden were to finish first or second, more or less, okay, that's important, but that's a kind of dog bites man story. If Amy Klobuchar, sitting out there in a distant fifth, were to show up in second or even a strong third, that's a man bites dog story. That's important. All of a sudden, the attention turns to her.
Professor, however we got here, and however Rube Goldberg it may appear to some of the rest of us around the country, has it done a pretty good job over time? If you look back through history, has it by and large, on average, over time, picked out the strongest or one of the strongest candidates?
Well, of course, it all depends upon what you mean by doing a good job. I mean, there are two good effects of the caucuses, even if they weren't part of the initial attention. The first is that they offer candidates a chance to try out themselves as their message and as a candidate. It's like building a race car, putting it out on the track and seeing how well the car and the drivers perform. So that's a good thing about the caucuses. The second thing is that they force candidates to talk to voters as real human beings, not as simply campaign props for photo ops. Journalists aren't supposed to become the story. So there's a limit to the point to which you can press a candidate on a particular question. That doesn't apply to voters. In various venues, folks here can say, what do you think about that? I don't know what you say. But as long as journalists think Iowa's important, candidates will think Iowa's important. And as long as candidates think Iowa's important, journalists will think Iowa's important.
Following along with that, I mean, it gets an inordinate amount of attention when you look at the amount of time a candidate spends in Iowa. Sure. per capita, a very small state, compared to literally the rest of the country, Iowans are getting a really good look. But is Iowa really the state that brings out the best national issues, the right demographics? I mean, it's a bit of a time capsule here in Iowa as far as the rest of the country is concerned.
Well, in our book, what I did was, and this is a couple cycles ago, I certainly pointed to this issue that I know is not demographically representative of the country. And that's not unimportant. At the same time, if you ask, what do Iowa Democrats think about which issues are the most important and what the right positions are, and ask the same question for Republicans? In fact, Iowa Democrats pretty well track Democrats nationwide, and Iowa Republicans pretty well track Republicans nationwide. But is there that demographic dimension to Iowa? No, certainly not.
Okay, many thanks to Professor Dennis Goldford. He is Professor of Political Science at Drake University. Coming up here, more from my conversation with Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer, how he says Democrats can counter President Trump's economic agenda. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
From the Bloomberg Newsroom in New York, I'm Bob Moon. Bloomberg Balance of Power with David Weston continues in a moment. But first, the day's top headlines. Balance of Power brought to you by the law offices of Deutsch Atkins PC, representing highly compensated executives with employment claims and severance issues. Call now for a free phone consultation, 800-498-0991. It's not enough to acquit a cheating president. Now Republicans feel empowered to go after his accusers. That complaint from Democrats is part of the closing argument being delivered before the Senate today. New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries was reacting to weekend threats by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, among others, to call the whistleblower in the case and investigate the impeachment investigation.
These are perilous times. If we determine that the remedy for a president who cheats in an election is to pronounce him vindicated and attack those who exposed his misconduct.
The 4 hours of arguments provide a final chance to influence public opinion and set the record ahead of a Senate acquittal that appears all but certain. Final impeachment voting is scheduled for Wednesday. China has opened a new hospital built in 10 days, infused cash into the tumbling financial markets, and further restricted people's movement in sweeping new steps to contain a rapidly spreading virus and its escalating impact. Chinese health authorities released updated figures of 362 deaths and 17,205 confirmed cases. And a programming reminder, we'll bring you special coverage of those caucuses with Bloomberg's David Weston live from Des Moines. Join us tonight at 10 p.m. Wall Street time, right here on Bloomberg Radio. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
From Des Moines, Iowa, this is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. There's no question that the economic numbers under President Trump are strong, and traditionally that means that the company is going to get another term. So how do Democrats counter that? I spoke to presidential candidate Tom Steyer.
That's why I want to be the nominee, because that actually what you're saying is not true. Is it a strong economy if it's growing, but all of the additional income goes to the richest Americans and the biggest corporations?
Well, but real wages are going up for the lowest quartile.
If you look at what's happened, you're saying we have low unemployment. People can't afford to live on the wages that this economy produces. People are having to hold down 2 and 3 jobs. If you look at really what's going on in the United States of America, this president gave the biggest tax cut in history to the richest Americans and the biggest corporations. If you look at the rates, we have a regressive tax structure. Rich people pay a lower percentage of their income in taxes than working people. That is absolutely unjust. The biggest corporations have an average tax rate of 11%. That is a crazy low number. The fact of the matter is, this is a president who is running an economy for the people at Mar-a-Lago, and the working Americans are getting absolutely left behind. And he said in his second term, he's going to balance the budget that he blew up with his tax cut for rich people by going after entitlements, namely people's health care spending. This is a guy who's been terrible for working Americans.
Let's take all of that at face value and say that's absolutely true.
It is true.
But do the Democrats have a communications problem? Because if you look at the polling right now, people give Donald Trump a lot of credit on the economy. They think the economy is doing well, and they give him credit for it. So is there a communications problem with all the campaigning going on out in Iowa, New Hampshire, places like that? I'm not sure the American people are hearing what you're saying.
Well, let me say this. That's why I want to be the candidate. Whoever's going to win. Mr. Trump's running on the economy. You know it. He says it every single day. I think 2 nights ago he was in Des Moines and he said, if I don't win, your farms are going to go to hell. I mean, he doesn't have to have any logic or reason behind it. Actually, he's been a terrible president for farmers. Absolutely terrible with his trade war and his waivers for oil refineries in terms of biofuels. He's been a terrible president for Iowa farmers.
That was part of my conversation with Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer, campaigning out here in Iowa for those caucuses. We're back now with Bloomberg contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino, and we're joined by Robert Griffin. He's the research director for the Democracy Fund Voter Study Group. So welcome. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So you've done a study here. You've done a lot of polling here. What can you tell us about the extent to which pocketbook issues will really drive voters this time?
So I think really the historical context is necessary here. We've got data from like the 20th century that says that the economy matters when it comes to how people vote. But what we've seen within the last 2 election cycles, so that's Barack Obama's sort of performance in 2012 and his presidency, as well as Trump's presidency, is there's a growing disconnect between people's sentiments about the economy and how well people are approving of them. And this is kind of in line with other research that's been done out there that says polarization has maybe gotten so bad that people are just not making a decision based on this. And even more than that, their perceptions of how the economy is doing is influenced by their partisanship.
So, Robert, that sounds like the polarization is what's driving apart people's attitudes toward the economy. How then do you look at that and say, well, you know, in most of the public opinion polls, as David said to candidate Steyer, that Trump is actually getting a lion's share of the public support, over 50%, that support him on the economy?
Well, you can have people support them on the economy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be driving their vote at the end of the day. I mean, again, look at his approval numbers overall. This is a person where we've had the economy going into, less than 5% unemployment, wages are growing, and yet his approval ratings overall cannot break this sort of like high 30s, low 40s numbers.
Well, if it isn't the economy, then what is it? Because traditionally we think it's pocketbook issues. I mean, in the off-year election, in the midterm election, it appeared to be health care. But that's really closely related to people's personal financial situation.
I think if we especially look at, let's say, 2012 to 2016, one of the growing sort of movers of people's opinions is actually their attitudes about more social issues. So attitudes about race, attitudes about immigration, attitudes about gender. These are becoming increasingly correlated with people's opinions overall. And again, those are some things that are very core to people's identity and their understanding of the world. If you have sort of daylight between maybe how they feel about the economy and how they feel about these other things that are a bit closer to the heart, the evidence so far appears to be that the economy is becoming just a bit less important relative to those.
So can I ask you how much of this, and I'm sure you controlled for this in your study, has to do with the fact that when the economy is strong, to your point, people have the option of looking at other issues, right? Unemployment is 3.5% lower than that in Iowa. So we have the option of looking at other issues. How much of that would change if the economy wasn't doing so well, and then people say, aha, we're really going to think about the economy more as we vote? In other words, how much do you control for the good economic numbers out there?
Yeah, so I think in the past we've seen good economic numbers, good consumer confidence, but it's lined up with good presidential approval in the past. And I think just to your point, though, does this mean that the economy has no effect? It doesn't mean it has no effect. It's probably just less than if we rewound the clock and looked at what was going on maybe 20 years ago. So again, if there was a recession today, I think Trump's numbers would tank a little bit, but it's not going to probably be take as much of a hit as we would have seen in the past. What I like to say about this is there are sort of lower ceilings and higher floors to American presidential approval because people's attitudes are a bit more locked in.
Even with the advent of millennials into the voting age population, I mean, this is the largest single group of voters in one generation that we're going to see come through, really, in modern history. Yeah. How do you see them affecting this dynamic? Not so much on the polarization, because they inherit that, but on economic issues in particular.
Well, so, again, I think what's happened to this generation in particular, what we've seen in the past, As generations get older, they get a bit more conservative, and that's often connected to the signs of adulthood. I'm getting married, I'm buying a house, I'm having a 401k. The issue is that the recession actually delayed a lot of these events for millennials. So this is a generation that so far has not really grown more conservative as it's gotten older. And as you're saying, it's getting bigger and bigger by the year. And often these economic pressures, these life consideration pressures, are not having the same influence on them that they did previous generations.
So let me ask what, for me, is the ultimate question. Do facts not matter as much? When you say people's perception of the economy and their is influenced by their partisanship, I mean, those things are factual. I mean, the number is 100 or it's 50. But is it really a diminution of the importance of facts?
Yeah, I think there's something to that. The analogy I like to use is hurricane partisanship. Everything is getting caught up in the sway of that sort of piece of people's identity. Everything's starting to be seen through that lens. It doesn't mean things have no effect. It doesn't mean facts are worthless or anything like that. But it does mean that compared to the expectations that we had in the past, we should start to downgrade how important these things are a little bit.
So in that earlier package, Steyer says he's going to take the economy as his number one issue if he's the nominee. Isn't he barking up the wrong tree?
Yeah, it may well be. I mean, I think to the extent that the Democrats have sort of a strong platform to run on, the economy is doing quite well. You're going to run on Trump's strengths. That doesn't make a ton of sense. And it'll be interesting to see if Trump himself can stick to that point. He often has not shown the discipline, especially in the 2016 race, to sort of focus on the issues where he's doing best.
Many thanks to Robert Griffin. He is Democracy Fund Voter Study Group Research Director. Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino are going to be sticking with us for some final thoughts before the caucus. And a programming note now, we will have special coverage of tonight's results. That's going to start at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Television and on radio. And tomorrow, President Trump is going to deliver his State of the Union address, and we're going to have live coverage of that as well, and also of the Democratic response. That starts at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. This is Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ are all advancing right now. This update brought to you by National Realty, NRIA, developers of high-return income-producing properties for investor partners. See them at nria.net. Stocks rebounded from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. Brent Schutte is Chief Investment Strategist at Northwestern Mutual. He was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television.
I think as you look into this year, as we get past these fears that this too will end, you have a lot of stimulus pulsing through the veins of the economy. You have the trade war, which I believe will continue to tamp down. It is an election year. And I do think those LEIs will move up, not only in the U.S., but globally, and that will eventually cause small value and international likely to outperform after underperforming for many, many years.
And today, commodities remain under pressure with copper heading for a 14th straight loss. West Texas Intermediate crude lower now by 2.1%, $50.45 a barrel. Brent crude, $54.85. It is down by 3.1%. U.S. Treasury is poised to unveil plans for its new 20-year securities at Wednesday's quarterly refunding. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
The Treasury is trying to lock in on low interest rates to fund a runaway budget deficit. Bond dealers are waiting to learn when the Treasury will start auctioning 20-year debt and whether it will adjust sales of other coupon-bearing securities. The Treasury last auctioned 20-year debt in the 1980s. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Tesla shares rallying for a fifth day as a torrent of good news further boosted investor sentiment. Panasonic, which makes batteries for Tesla at its jointly operated plant in Nevada, says the business turned profitable in the quarter ending December 31st. Tesla up right now by 13.5%. 10-year down 3/32 yield 1.51%. S&P up 29, up 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
For Bloomberg Television and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston from Des Moines, Iowa, covering these Iowa caucuses. And joining us now with some final thoughts is Bloomberg national political reporter Tyler Pager. Also with us are our Bloomberg contributors, Rick Davis, who managed John McCain's presidential campaign, and Jeannie Zaino of Iona College. So, Tyler, give us final thoughts, particularly about Bernie Sanders seems to be the story right now, at least among the media people out here.
Yeah, I think that's the big story. We're seeing it on the ground. You're seeing it when you talk to Democratic operatives across the state. This is Bernie Sanders' caucus to win. And if he does that, that sends a clear message that he is the progressive standard bearer of this race. And he heads into New Hampshire with even more momentum than he did when he trounced Hillary Clinton there in 2016.
How much of an impact of being the progressive standard bearer does that have on someone like Elizabeth Warren, who's been the pretender to that throne?
Right. I think it really depends on the voting margin and the delegate margin. There's not that many delegates here at play in Iowa, but if he takes out a big lead there, that just sends the message. And Iowa is not about delegates as much as it is about momentum and narrative. And so what we're going to see here is if Bernie Sanders claims victory and heads to New Hampshire, where he's already the favorite there, that could really be a 1-2 punch for Bernie Sanders and hurt Elizabeth Warren's candidacy.
What is Joe Biden looking to do to just get out of here and get to New Hampshire and then get himself to South Carolina?
I mean, the thing for Joe Biden is New Hampshire's not a strong point for him either. That's going to be another place where Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are going to be duking it out for 1 and 2, both neighboring senators. I think Joe Biden really needs to just survive and advance and reassure his donors and his voting base that once the states open up a little bit and you get into Nevada and South Carolina, that's where his time is really he needs to win there in order to continue on.
So the one person we haven't talked about who's in the top tier is Pete Buttigieg.
Exactly.
He's having big crowds. He's got a great organization. You know, people here are talking a lot about him. Where do you think he's got to come out?
Yeah, I think he's got to come top 3, probably maybe even top 2. This is his state. He has staked his entire candidacy on doing well here and in New Hampshire to catapult him and to make inroads with voters of color. They've been arguing that since the beginning and invested a lot of time and resources here.
But does he have more flexibility? Because there aren't quite as many expectations for him. And if Bernie Sanders does not win, it might be a big disappointment. And similarly, if Joe Biden comes in 4th or even 3rd.
Right. I think for Pete Buttigieg, he definitely wants to be the leading moderate, beating out Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar here and prove that electability narrative. That's one of the things that's dogged him. He's 38 years old. He's only been the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. He needs to prove that he can win, and this is the first test.
Is Amy Klobuchar going to have a difficult decision tonight, depending on what happens? Because she's the one who really has the neighboring, senator. And
right. I think if she comes in the top 4, that's a big win for her. That means she's knocked out one of the top tier candidates. I still see her going forward to New Hampshire. If she finished 5th, she got endorsed by the largest newspaper there. She has some good endorsements from elected officials. I see her going there, but again, she does need to have a good night here and in New Hampshire.
So the last Minnesotan who ran in Iowa was Pawlenty, and he staked his campaign on the neighboring state here in Iowa, and basically it killed his candidacy when he didn't come in the top tier. You think that Amy can survive that?
I think so, just because of what the expectations have set. I think she could have a strong finish. She's visited all 99 counties, the only top-tier candidate to do that. Wow. I think it's a difficult path for her regardless of that, because what happens in Iowa. But
that's the best fact. She visited 99 counties. That'll tell you something. Many thanks now to Bloomberg's Tyler Pager, and of course to our Bloomberg contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Zaino. And stay tuned for a special coverage of tonight's results. That starts at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Television and Radio, live from Des Moines. This is Bloomberg.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. How could you not love him?
Hamilton the Pug's adoption story started at a shelter. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
That saying...
Why would anyone shop at TK Maxx? I don't have the time.
Well, you can still look fine, because there's big brand deals at TK Maxx online.
Ooh, TKMaxx.com.
Ridiculous possibilities are here to stay when you TK Maxx the right way.
As le boss, I expect only the best for my office. Air conditioning, super comfortable seating, digital radio, and rear parking sensors. From dealing with deliveries to balancing the books, my new Citroën van, my office on the move. Award-winning Citroën vans. Like you, they do it all. With £500 off during the February van event. Citroën. £500 discount inclusive of VAT on qualifying relay, dispatch and Berlingo vans ordered from 1st to 29th of February and registered by the 31st of March. Business users only. Full T's and C's at citroen.co.uk.
5 is in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow
Bayless.
and TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're back. We're still streaming on YouTube. We're in our Bloomberg Radio studio. Welcome to Bloomberg Business Week for this Monday, February 3rd, 2020, a new month. But Jason, I feel like some of the same old factors from January, the coronavirus. We've got, of course, the Iowa caucus. And then we've got
Google earnings. We've got Tesla. So much of the world we need to figure out. Who could we ask about that?
We've got a Nobel laureate to do that.
Okay. That checks out.
He's also got a new book, so we're going to talk to Paul Krugman in just a moment. First up, though, let's get to what is a busy Monday. Covering it all for us is Charlie Pellet.
We love it like that. Thank you very much, Carol Master. Thank you, Jason, and welcome back. Let's begin with Alphabet, parent of Google. It reports after the bell, up now by 3.3%. You alluded to Tesla. It is up 14% today, up $96 a share. Tesla now at $746.26. We'll be watching that stock throughout the day. But worth pointing out, too, that in the year-to-date column, YTD, and yes, this year is young, but Tesla shares so far this year, they are up 78.5%. Here's where the U.S. equity market stands. Higher right now. Stocks are rebounding from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculated efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. S&P up 26, up 0.8%. The Dow higher by 175 points, up right now by 0.6%. And NASDAQ up 117 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain of 1.3%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds at yield 1.52%. Gold down $12 the ounce, lower by 0.8%, $15.76 the ounce. Crude, major story today. West Texas Intermediate retreating. We've got WTI down now by 2.4%, $50.35 a barrel. Briefly got below $50. Brent $54.76. It is down now by 3%. Finally, got to mention copper. We've got commodities. Copper, by the way, falling, heading for a 14th straight loss. Recapping, S&P up 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week live here on a busy Monday afternoon. As you said at the top, Carol, so much going on. We've got a lot of questions for Paul Krugman. He's in the building. He's going to join us in just a few minutes. Also, Google, Alphabet reporting earnings after the bell. Can they keep up this tech momentum? See, I just coined a phrase there that we've been feeling so far.
It's a new hashtag.
I got a clap from Charlie Pellet on that.
Well,
and
speaking of momentum, we've got to talk about Tesla. We're going to do that because check it out. It's a fundamental. It's also a stock story today, up 20% more, or more than 20% at its highs today. And there's some fundamental reasons behind it. This stock is up about 76% already in 2020. So, man, if you're short it, it's not been an easy one to
That's
short,
exactly what I was thinking about. Like,
least.
if you were one of those people who was essentially the subject of Dana Hull's cover story a couple weeks ago in Bloomberg Business Week, the shorts getting burned, you are scorched to a crisp at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Ugh. It has been really tough to be short this one. All right, so lots to talk about on this Monday from so many different perspectives. Let's bring in our team to talk about the Business Week agenda. Mike Regan, senior editor, lead blogger at the Bloomberg Markets Live blog here in our Interactive Broker studio, along with Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News. And I think it's kind of interesting because I feel like a lot of folks are freaking out a little bit Friday because we had a bunch of selling. We were down for the week, and yet we had a rally today. We're back and forth, I feel like, Mike, based on, in many ways, the virus headlines.
Absolutely. I mean, the virus is really running the show in markets at the moment. What I find really interesting is despite this massive, not quite massive, but a pretty noticeable sell-off we've seen because of the coronavirus, we haven't seen 2 days in a row that we're down in almost 2 months. So it kind of, gives you the sense that that instinct to sort of buy the dip is still there. I think on Friday, as you pointed out, a lot of times when you have these sort of elongated risk-off episodes, I think back to the financial crisis or geopolitical uncertainty, Fridays can be rough because people are very much worried about more bad news
over the weekend,
coming out over the weekend. Yeah. So, this weekend came and went, and we're not seeing this dramatic rise in coronavirus cases in the U.S. or in Europe. And I think that's enough for today for people to dip their toe back in, take on a little bit more risk in the hopes that, God willing, this thing does get contained, that they do sort of get it under control in China, and that everywhere else it just sort of stays a minor story.
But Dave, I have to say, when we started to see the headlines last night here in the United States, when the Asian markets opened and Chinese stocks were down, 8-9%, did you expect a different tone in the market today? I confess I did.
Well, but didn't you remember that the Chinese market's been closed for a couple of days?
I know, but still 8 or 9%, that's a lot.
It is, but they're playing catch up because they were closed all last week for the Lunar New Year holiday.
Did you just lady-splain that to me?
I totally did. Market's been closed for a long time because of the Lunar New Year holiday.
Absolutely.
They didn't have time to react, and so it gets kind of...
So you're like 9%, it's fine.
The other thing is we should bear in mind that in China, they have 10% daily price limits.
Yeah.
So in other words, stocks couldn't fall more than 10% individually, and therefore, kind of constrain what's going on with the indexes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few days. But I'll tell you what else is telling. If you look at the S&P 500, best performer on the day, Gilead Sciences. And what's happening there is that China is running an accelerated trial of one of their drugs as a possible treatment for the coronavirus. And where is it going to happen? In the epicenter of it all.
Right.
So, it goes to show you that, yes, there is a focus. In the case of Gilead, though, it's a positive focus. The stock's up 5.5%.
I have to say, with the virus, I was listening to Daybreak this morning on Bloomberg Radio, and somebody put it into perspective saying the common virus that comes around every year, I think we've had more deaths as a result of that virus than we have from the coronavirus.
Oh,
so, right?
Many
more.
It might be like by a factor of thousands more.
Right. So it's just, we have to remember this. I mean, I'm not putting any I'm not making it light or making light the coronavirus, but I just think we do need to keep that in perspective.
No,
right?
Absolutely true. What are you watching other than not the Chinese stock market, apparently? Because there's nothing to see here. Wow. Coming in hot from Miami.
Explaining on this Monday. Tesla, I know we're going to talk about it a bunch, but man, that stock just blows my mind. Yeah. It was up almost 21% today. It's up 16% as we speak, and it's up 80% so far this year. So it's just nuts.
And of course, it will be my chart of the day that we'll talk about later on. Absolutely.
Deep tease.
Just tease. Quickly?
Quickly, I'm watching tech in general. The NASDAQ just up like crazy, really anticipating Alphabet earnings for sure. So we're going to talk about that and so much more. Coming up, we're going to talk with Paul Krugman. We've got a lot of questions for him. In the meantime, let's thank Mike Regan, senior editor over at Bloomberg Markets, and Dave Wilson, our stocks editor. He'll be back with us for his aforementioned chart of the day and his stock of the day after the close of trading. Let's do the Bloomberg Business Week bite of the day for now. It's one number that tells us a lot. Today's number is $81 million, Carol. A group including two of Forever 21's biggest landlords has offered to buy the bankrupt retailer for $81 million, a fraction of what the international fashion pioneer was once worth. The consortium includes Simon Property and Brookfield, two names very familiar to us. Deal calls for bankruptcy court approval of the sale by February 18th, just a couple weeks.
Well, these malls, right, they have to think about the stores that are important to them and to keeping foot traffic coming in. And they want foot traffic of all ages, right? That's how you make kind of a healthy mall. So I think it's interesting about the relationship, but also to see what's going on here in terms of maybe trying to make a save here.
Right. So as I think about the tone of the market today, clearly at least different from what I anticipated last night. We didn't didn't really know exactly what was going to happen here on Monday morning. And certainly that was the reason that we saw such a big sell-off, as Mike Regan was saying on Friday. We were down in Miami as it was all going on. And, folks at the Super Bowl were kind of keeping an eye
Well,
on
Joe
what was
Theismann was my favorite when he came by, and he's like, so the markets did this today. And he was just like, before he even sat down, he was like reeling off his holdings and, knowing about the market trends. Anyway, we have so much to talk about. We really do have the perfect guest. Paul Krugman, he's got a new book out, and we're going to get into that, really talk about some of the day's issues, how he sees it from a macro perspective. And I really think what he has to say about, the inability for us to get through false information in this environment. It's a tough one, so lots to come.
All right, that ahead. First, Bob Moon, World National Headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason Carroll, who cheated? Is it President Trump or Democrats? His lawyers sought to turn impeachment closing arguments by Democrats on their heads today. Kenneth Starr arguing it's Trump's critics who are trying to overturn an election before voters get their say. Trump's lawyer using a sports metaphor to make his point.
It's why we don't allow deflated footballs or stealing signs from the field.
Democratic House prosecutors have 2 hours to sum up the case they made in 21 hours last week to convict President Trump of abuse of power and obstructing Congress. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman is live on Capitol Hill with the latest. Irv.
Bob, Chairman Adam Schiff told the Senate it's not too late to take action to defend American democracy.
We urge you, in the face of overwhelming evidence of the president's guilt, and knowing that if left in office he will continue to seek foreign interference in the next election, to vote to convict and to remove from office Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States.
The trial will conclude with votes on the articles of impeachment Wednesday afternoon. Between now and then, senators can take the floor to explain their positions. Bob.
Irv Chapman, live on Capitol Hill. Thank you. Chinese health authorities now report 362 people have died from the coronavirus outbreak. More than 17,200 people there have been sickened. The hours tick down to Iowa's caucuses, with many voters still undecided. We'll bring you special coverage of those caucuses with Bloomberg's David Weston, live from Des Moines. It starts tonight at 10 p.m. Wall Street time, right here on Bloomberg Radio. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
Financial leaders enjoy talking with Tom Keene and Jonathan Farrell.
What was it like having the giant darken the door every once in a while?
Experts appreciate it when what they have to say is understood.
Do you think that we might have seen a cyclical peak in the labour market?
It's the same reason we're recommending Bloomberg Surveillance to you.
Everything you thought would happen is happening.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org, because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Hi, everyone. Al Roker here. As a guy with his own catchphrase, I appreciate that after 75 years, Smokey's only said,
"Only you can prevent wildfires."
But I'm filling in because there's a lot more to report. Like when it's dry or windy. Be careful burning yard waste, because wildfires can even start in your neck of the woods. Go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
5 is in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA On Demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
Ah, finally another commercial, said no one ever. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade now and get over 45 commercial-free music stations.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Keenan.
Search NFL today.
Did you know your favorite radio stations are in your pocket? Yes, the TuneIn app lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio anywhere you want. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Along the goal line, Martin scores! He takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
Hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
And a move, and a shot, he scores!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
What are you doing, Rich? I was just telling everyone how great you are. Texting and driving makes good people look bad. Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org, a public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology, data, news, and media services foster innovation, empower clients, and offer nearly limitless opportunities for career growth. Visit Bloomberg.com/careers today to view our current job opportunities. Bloomberg LP is an equal opportunity employer. The address once again is Bloomberg.com/careers.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We are well off our session highs, but it is an up Monday here after Friday's sell-off. S&P 500 index up now by 23 points. That is a gain of 0.7%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 135 points, up by 0.5%. NASDAQ up 109, higher by 1.2%. The Dow, by the way, just dipping back again into a negative year-to-date number. On the year, it is down by 0.5%. So stocks rebounding from the worst week in 6 months. We've got the 10-year down 430 seconds, yield now 1.52%. Gold is down 0.8%, 15.76 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude big story today, tumbling 2.7%. A barrel of WTI now at 50.13. Brent crude, the global benchmark, 54.38. Brent is now down by 4%. So again, recapping the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, all pushing higher. S&P up 23 points right now. That is a gain of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks a lot. You were listening to Bloomberg Business Week.
So Paul Krugman is with us, Nobel laureate, economist, New York Times columnist, NYU Distinguished Professor of Economics, and Professor Emeritus at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School, author and editor of nearly 30 books. His latest book, Arguing with Zombies, Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. He is in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio in New York. Paul, so nice to have you here. Welcome back.
Hi, good to be back.
So, I want to get into your book. I want to first, though, ask you, in a world and a day where we have headlines on the virus, we're talking about politics in the Iowa caucus, we're talking about Tesla rallying, we're watching earnings, how do you kind of hone in on what's the most important things for investors, for kind of the world at large, in terms of what makes everything tick?
Oh, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I mean, I try to work on the things where I have something to contribute. So it's I'll look at that. So I did write about the coronavirus, but from the economics point of view, because I think we know a fair bit now about how the world has changed and about global supply chains. So I'll do that. And actually, I don't know whether to be scared about dying, but I'm really very concerned about the disruptive effect on business because we have this value chain global economy now. I'll write about political implications of economic doctrine, fiscal policy, whatever. But it's all kind of, to be honest, it's a little bit hard to break through. And especially, I watch the readers. What people want to read at the New York Times these days. Lately, it's tended to be sort of impeachment, how to boil a perfect egg, impeachment, grilling with mayonnaise. So it's a mixture of politics and escapism. Right. It's a little bit hard to get my stuff through.
I love that, though, politics and escapism.
Yeah, absolutely. So what inspired this book in particular? Because you do, as you tend to have, a pretty clear idea that you're putting out there. But to Carol's point, in a very difficult world to break through.
Yeah. Well, it is an election year, and that was one consideration. I have also been writing for the Times for 20 years. We've made it's been a while since I reprinted so much, though not all of the book is reprinted columns over the years. And it just seemed to me that it was a good time to try and pull this together to understand why we're in the political policy mess we're in, and also what has worked, because we have had some success stories over there. So it just seemed like an opportune moment.
And so when you went back and sort of looked at the collection, what were the through lines that immediately jumped out at you, and which were the ones that were maybe a little harder to discern?
I've been trying to say this without sounding like I've got a swelled head, though I probably do. But I mean, I think I was surprised at how much stuff holds up. How long, there have been consistent themes that I've been pounding on for 15 years now, and most of them are still relevant. Most of the work holds up pretty well. It's the role of government in making our economy a little bit more humane than it would otherwise be, the role of government policy in helping to stabilize the economy, get us closer to full employment. All of those things still hold up. Lots of things have not changed that much, except that the quality of our discourse keeps on getting worse.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that discourse. I think this is in your book where you specifically say ideas that should have been killed by contrary evidence, but instead keep shambling along eating people's brains.
Yes, that's zombie ideas. Those are the zombies, and
But speak to this, because we have these conversations that, we grew up in a world of journalism where fact was fact, and you understood that, and I feel like we've gotten away from that.
Yeah, facts is part of the issue, although it's stuff that just doesn't get through. So the most important zombie in American politics is the belief that cutting taxes on rich people is magical and actually pays for itself. And that has never happened, has never worked, has failed again and again, and yet when we had the debate over the 2017 tax cut, even the alleged moderates, they aren't really, but the supposed moderates within the Republican Party, people like Susan Collins, were saying, I believe that this tax cut will pay for itself and it will reduce the budget deficit. And sure enough, of course, we've got $1 trillion deficit. It did what these things always do, which is to blow off the deficit. Right. So it is kind of hard. How do you have economic discussions when a large part of the political spectrum is committed to believing things that are manifestly not true?
So speaking of the deficits, modern monetary theory, you've had some thoughts on that. You have engaged in some ripostes, as it were, around that. Why do you think it has at least captured the imagination at this point?
Well, partly. So, I mean, that's really...
By the way, the look on your face when I said modern monetary theory, I wish I could have said that.
It's a debate I don't want to have, because at least for the moment, the MMT people and me are on the same side on the practical policy issues. And in fact, it's also what really drives people like me crazy is we're not actually sure what it is. When you try and get what are the fundamental tenets of modern monetary theory and how are they different from what conventional Keynesians like myself would say? And you get very long answers that don't actually seem to consist of complete sentences. A lot of it seems to be just really sort of inventing new terms for old concepts and coupled with a kind of attitude that says this is all very radical when it actually mostly isn't. So it's kind of crazy making, and it's really a distraction from the debates we need to be having.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the debates that we need to be having. So we're going to come back with Paul Krugman. His new book is Arguing with Zombies, Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. So we'll continue our conversation right here on
And
Bloomberg.
I do love what he said, because it is amazing, and I can say it, and just swell his head a little bit more. It's amazing how well things written years and years and years ago really hold up, even in this incredibly fractured and confusing market of ideas in many ways.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Massar along with Jason Kelly. We'll come back with Paul Krugman in just a moment right here on Bloomberg Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Worries about the coronavirus epidemic are weighing on Wall Street as the market cautiously recovers from Friday's sell-off. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 131, the S&P 500 up 22, the Nasdaq Composite is up 107. GlaxoSmithKline is joining the battle against the coronavirus. It will work with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations to speed creation of a vaccine and then quickly ramp up production. Glaxo is one of the world's largest vaccine makers. Earth Fare is going out of business, the third supermarket chain to shut down this year. The organic grocer operates about 50 stores in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast regions. FanDuel has picked Scientific Games to provide technology for its sports betting and online casino business. Sources say Scientific Games will provide the betting platform in states where FanDuel now operates and in new states that come online. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscription.
They don't chant your name when you give blood, or sing songs about you. But patients and their families will remember you forever. Because your blood can change their lives. We need more blood donors in Tooting, the West End and Edgware. Bleed for London. Join us today at blood.co.uk.
5 is in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow
Bayless.
at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Kansas.
Search NFL today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Along the goal line, scores! He takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Move, hit a shot, he scores!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Jason Kelly. We're going to continue our conversation.
With Paul Krugman. That conversation. First, let's check in with Charlie Pellet. He's got an update on the trade. Hey, Charlie.
All right. Well, hello there. Green on the screen on this Monday, the day after the Super Bowl. You've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ recovering, up 25 points, up 0.8% right now, 32.51 on the S&P. The Dow's advancing 160 points, up 0.6%, and NASDAQ higher by 120 points, up by 1.3%. 10-year down 0.4%, 1.52 on the 10-year. We've got gold down $12 the ounce, down 0.8%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.8%, 50.09 a barrel. So U.S. stocks are rebounding from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. Jim Paulson is chief investment strategist at Luthold Whedon Capital Management.
I do think that the way these things normally run is that they're not last for years, typically. And this is certainly creating a major downward shock for China and Asia in general. Some shock at this point for the whole world.
but maybe it's just going to be a one-quarter event.
Gold is down 0.8%, $15.77 the ounce again. Crude oil, West Texas Intermediate, just hovering right at the $50 a barrel level. Tesla shares have rallied for a fifth day as a torrent of good news further boosts investment sentiment. Right now, Tesla surging 16.7%. You heard that right, up $108 the share at $7.58. Year to date, up by 81.4%. But again, Tesla rallying right now, 16.5%. Alphabet reports earnings after the closing bell, up 3.2%. Roku and Fox both climbing today after inking a new distribution agreement over the weekend, preventing a potential blow to viewers' ability to stream yesterday's Super Bowl broadcast. Roku shares, they are pushing higher now by 6.5%. Fox up by 1.4%. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you. Paul Krugman still with us, Nobel laureate, City University of New York, distinguished professor of economics. His latest book, Arguing with Zombies, Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future. You were too kind not to correct me, so forgive my mistake.
Okay. All right. So, Paul, great to have you still with us. I do want to go back to the coronavirus because from an economic perspective, from a market perspective, the market still seems to be trying to figure out. But you mentioned this new world that we're living in, this value-based supply chain, I think is what you said. Help us understand the economic implications here.
Okay. So, I wrote a column because Wilbur Ross said something truly boneheaded, which is not that unusual, but it was a good jumping off point where he said, this is great for America. Right. Help us compete with the Chinese. And that wouldn't have been totally boneheaded 40 years ago. And you actually did have a world where kind of national manufacturing bases competed head-to-head with each other. But now we're in this world of these complicated, interlinked value chains where, I've got an iPhone in my pocket here. Where was that iPhone made? Well, the last step was China. Right. But, in fact, that's the last step of a very long and winding chain, and there are pieces of it that were made in many places, and it's been shipped across multiple borders. And in that kind of world, anything that disrupts manufacturing anywhere is actually going to hurt manufacturing everywhere. And so the coronavirus, and that's actually, by the way, most of the evidence says that, actually all of the people who've actually done evidence says that the Trump trade war has actually hurt U.S. manufacturing, not helped it. And the reason is because of the value chains. What it did was it raised the cost of U.S. manufacturers by raising the cost of imported inputs. And the coronavirus is kind of like the Trump trade war on steroids. If it turns out to be as serious as we fear it might be, it's going to be a really pretty nasty thing, even for people who are not at all at risk of being infected themselves.
I feel like, going back to your book, that we're at risk, too, of kind of creating a better future if we have folks putting out these ideas that have been, disproven, if you will, and that they don't make sense. And we certainly see that among politicians. I do wonder, do you have faith in maybe the private sector to kind of move things along? Elon Musk, for instance, like him or not, he has certainly pushed forward the idea of an EV that many traditional automakers, Paul, would have said it's going to take much longer to do. And I feel like he's moved up that. So do you have any faith in kind of the private sector moving along some of these ideas?
Well, sometimes. I mean, I do say in Arguing with Zombies that the overwhelming problem, the one I have, sometimes I ask why isn't it the only thing I write about is climate change. And the private sector has actually set us up to solve that problem. We've had this incredible technological revolution in renewable energy, and electric vehicles is part of that because it means that we can electrify a lot of transport as well, and we can generate the electricity in ways that don't generate greenhouse gases. And that technology is already... Now, government policy helped. Without some of the investments that took place, particularly under the much maligned Obama stimulus, the green energy wouldn't be where it is right now. But the private sector also did its part and delivered this great technological stuff. The trouble is, first, that's sometimes not enough, and sometimes the politicians are fighting it. So we have the Trump administration trying to force us to burn coal, even though the private sector really doesn't want the coal anymore.
Right. What's the best economic lens to look at the Iowa caucus and the early Democratic vying for the nomination?
Oh, boy, I mean, I have, by the way, zero idea what's going to happen. But the caucus is it's a deeply unrepresentative state and a deeply peculiar. Somebody once said a caucus is an artisanal primary, right? It's a really bad way to judge what voters actually want, and with a highly unrepresentative set of voters. So this is really bad. Now, God knows. I mean, but let me tell you, it might be decisive for the nomination, particularly if Biden wins. That may be kind of it. But if he doesn't, then probably slog on for quite a while. But my insight is that in terms of actual policy, it hardly matters which Democrat wins. That as long as a Democrat wins the general election, that Bernie Sanders has a lot of big plans, but in reality he would only be able to do part of them. And Biden, may be kind of old guard, but he's actually offering a pretty progressive economic program, and his party would force him to go through with that. Right. So the reality is that we're going to get a Democrat who, in practice, would be what Europeans would call a social Democrat. Right. Would expand the safety net, raise taxes on the rich, and I'm not going to get worked up at all about who ends up in the lead.
Well, and one of the zombie ideas that you talk about in your book is the myth of the socially liberal, fiscally conservative voter. So there's a lot of things that are very relevant to today.
Well, yeah, there are. I know some socially liberal, fiscally conservative.
Yeah, you know a lot.
I actually tend to I basically encountered them in breakfast meetings at Bloomberg. And they have an average net worth of maybe 1,000 times mine, at least. And they all wear gray suits, and they are absolutely not. There is nobody out there. They effectively represent maybe 3% of the electorate.
Right. All right. Paul Krugman, what a treat for us. Distinguished Professor of Economics at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. His new book, it's a must read. Arguing with Zombies, relevant. Economics, Politics, and the Fight for a Better Future.
All right. Let's get a check on world and national news headlines. For that, let's toss things over.
Capitol Hill at this hour, and Bloomberg's Irv Chapman joins us live now with the latest. Irv.
Bob, White House counsel Pat Cipollone led off for the president's legal team.
At the end of the day, you must vote to acquit the president. At the end of the day, this is an effort to overturn the results of one election and to try to interfere in the coming election that begins today in Iowa.
His lawyers said the president did not condition military aid to Ukraine on an investigation of his potential re-election opponent, but only on assurances that Ukraine was fighting corruption and the Europeans were doing their share of the burden. Bob?
Irv Chapman, live on Capitol Hill. Thank you. The coronavirus has now spread to more than 17,000 confirmed cases in the world, and the numbers are rising. In the U.S., there are now 11 confirmed cases, one new one in Massachusetts, 4 more in California. 4 of the 5 had traveled to Wuhan, China. Nobody has died from it in the U.S.
Sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just text EXPLORE to 64,000 and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or text EXPLORE to 64,000 and try it for free. Text EXPLORE to 64,000.
Hey y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here.
Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career? One where you can be part of solving complex challenges across industries and geographies. Bloomberg's ever-expanding technology.
At TradePoint, we know that big jobs can mean a big shop around. We have a wide range of products from kitchens to plumbing to electrical or timber, so you can get it all in one place, 7 days a week, making big jobs smaller. So, for all you need, when you need it, get to TradePoint or go to tradepoint.co.uk.
5, he's in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
On the goal line, scores! It takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
The move, and a shot, they score!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards at the goal line. It's intercepted.
Listen live as the action unfolds, or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown to Kansas.
Search NFL today.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA on demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Always look for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. The Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, they're all pushing higher right now with the S&P 500 index up 27. That's a gain of 0.9%. Stocks are rebounding from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. The Dow up 188 points, up 0.7%, well off its session highs. And year to date, the Dow still showing a loss of 0.3%. NASDAQ up 123 points. That is a gain of just about 1.4%. 10 years down 5/30 seconds, yield now 1.52%. Gold down 0.8%. 15.77 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 2.9%. $50.09 a barrel. Did get below 50 briefly today. Brent, the global benchmark, down 3.9%, 54.42 a barrel. So again, recapping here, the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ, they're all advancing. S&P 500 index up 27. That is a gain of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Jason Kelly right here on Bloomberg Radio.
So I have to think that Ashley Vance, hey, that's his walk-in music in some ways.
His doorbell.
Given everything
his
that he's written about. We have many, many things to talk to him about, not the least of which is his story in the most recent edition of Bloomberg Business Week. Ashley is a feature writer for the magazine. He joins us on the phone from Palo Alto, California. Joel Weber, the editor of the magazine, is here with us in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. All right, so a small rocket maker running a different kind of space race. Ashley, all eyes on space, it feels like these days. Tell us about this guy.
Yeah, well, so there's
these guys.
These guys, yeah. It's a company called Astra, and they're based in Alameda, California, which is just kind of right next door to Oakland and San Francisco. And for the last 3 years, they've been building what's meant to be a small, cheap rocket, pretty much in secret until we did this story.
So, Ashley, talked about the model that they're trying to develop here.
Yeah, I mean, there's, for a long time, space was obviously kind of controlled by a handful of governments that had big, expensive rockets that didn't launch very often. And then Elon came around with SpaceX and made a big, expensive rocket that launched more often. And what these guys want to do is they're part of this whole class of startups that want to build much smaller rockets that, instead of costing $60 million or $100 million per launch, cost anywhere from $1 to $7 million per launch. And so they can't take as much stuff, but they get you to space much more cheaply. And the idea is that they may be able to launch, instead of once a month, maybe as much as every single day. And so it's I put it in the story, this idea of becoming like the FedEx for space.
Right. Sustainability comes to the space industry. What's interesting is Astra, right, was among a few finalists. They beat out some really well-known competitors. We're talking about Virgin and some others, right?
Yeah, there's this DARPA, the kind of R&D arm of the Defense Department, is sponsoring one of these. They do these grand challenges for various things, and so they have this thing called the Launch Challenge, and the whole idea was to get all these small rocket startups to compete against each other to see who could launch 2 rockets in a very short span of time, a few weeks in between the launches, and dozens of companies applied to be in this. Virgin was one of the 3 finalists as the list got whittled down, and another company called Vector. And so Vector went out of business last year, and Virgin pulled out of the competition, and so now Astra is the last rocket maker standing.
So, Ashley, another part that I'm kind of interested in here is like where they are in their trials, because this is like, it's not a foregone conclusion that this is all going to go their way.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, this business is hard. SpaceX
took years.
Yeah, they blew up their first 3 rockets before they finally got one to work. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, Astra's been operating in secret, but I've been following them during this whole journey. And so they have actually already flown 2 rockets from a spaceport in Alaska that's kind of run by the government. And both of those ended quite badly. The rockets came back to Earth before they were supposed to. And this new rocket is, they spent the last year revamping it, making it bigger, redoing the engines, and so in late February, they're going to make another attempt to go to orbit. But again, like you said, I mean, this may not work, and if it doesn't work, they're under a lot of pressure because there is a company in New Zealand called Rocket Lab that's been doing very, very well and has been launching all the time.
And Ashley, this world so well from so much reporting that you've done. I mean, where are we in sort of the development of this industry, as it were? We're still at the stage where a lot of flowers are going to bloom, as they say, and ultimately there will be consolidation. Has there already been consolidation? What does this look like as we go through the next 5 to 10 years, in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, so when SpaceX finally sort of hit its stride, I mean, it opened up this idea that, okay, individuals and private companies can finally get rockets to space. And so there's been this flood of startups who have come in and tried to prove they can build a rocket, and all this money that's come in, but it's completely unclear that there is a market for this many rockets and the need to launch a rocket every day.
To that end, like, who do they see being potential customers?
Yeah, I mean, the big driver for this is that traditionally satellites were things that took like 10 years to build. They cost $1 billion each, and they were about the size of a car or a bus, and you just launched it and you left it up there for a long time. But now there's literally anywhere from there's probably about 100 satellite startups that have much smaller satellites, about the size of a basketball, and they want to put up hundreds, if not tens of thousands, of these satellites for all kinds of tasks: imaging the Earth, connecting, the Internet of Things, all these devices, creating sort of space-based internet networks. And so the whole theory is that these small rocket companies will serve these small satellite makers, and you'll just have these rockets going up every day, taking new satellites into orbit. But we don't know. We don't know if the business case for these satellites will work. We don't know how many of these companies will survive or how many rockets will be needed to do all this.
Okay, so what is it about these guys and their technology? Like, what's been the breakthrough that makes them the one to watch?
So if Rocket Lab's kind of the gold standard right now for these small rocket makers, and it charges about $7.5 million per launch. It has this beautiful rocket that's made of carbon fiber and all this 3D printed engines and everything. Astra wants to be the low end of all this, so they're using really kind of like no breakthrough techniques. They're using aluminum. Everything in the machine shop is sort of techniques that have been perfected for years, but their whole pitch is that they'll be the first ones who get mass manufacturing of these types of things down and actually get the cost. Instead of $7.5 million, they want to get it down to like $1 million per launch, and so price would be their big weapon, I guess.
Ashley, just got about a minute left. Got to ask you, you wrote the book on Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the quest for a fantastic future. We'd be remiss. What do you make of Tesla shooting to the moon, no pun intended? It's up another 20%. Just got about 45 seconds. What do you make of what we were seeing this year when it comes to Elon Musk?
I mean, it's kind of amazing because this time last year it looked like the whole thing was going to go under, and that's what everyone was asking me. And so, I mean, it's sort of crazy. It's hard to put into words. I mean, to me, if you look at it now, they've obviously got their house in order a lot better, but people are clearly betting that this is like much more than if you believe this value valuation. You're sort of believing in a future where Tesla's an energy company and taking over the electric car market. And so I don't know. It's a little hard for me to fully buy in where it is right now, but they're doing much better.
Forward-looking PE of 95. What's wrong with that?
Oh, my
Just
God.
gonna say. Check out Ashley's book, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the Quest for a Fantastic Future. And of course, check out the magazine. That story going to be featured when it hits newsstands later this week. It's already at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg terminal. Our thanks to Ashley Vance joining us from California on the phone. Till Weber, our thanks to him as well. Bloomberg Business Week editor in our Interactive Broker studio.
5 is in. What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA On Demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
When you're not listening to your team, take it to the end zone, the rim, or the net. Keep up with the biggest moments in sports by following TuneIn on social media.
Block, Cook into the end zone for the touchdown.
From reminders of the live top games to tips of the best sports stations and podcasts.
Welcome to Undisputed. We are live from Los Angeles. I'm Jenny Taft here with Skip
Follow
Bayless.
at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to get the most out of TuneIn.
Central capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Monday. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all higher, holding on to gains as stocks rebound from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. Paul Krugman is CUNY Distinguished Professor of Economics. He was our guest moments ago on Bloomberg Business Week, and he talked about the coronavirus and implications for global trade.
Most of the evidence says that, actually all of the people who've actually done evidence said that the Trump trade war has actually hurt U.S. manufacturing, not helped it. And the reason is because of the value chains. What it did was it raised the cost of U.S. manufacturers by raising the cost of imported inputs. And the coronavirus is kind of like the Trump trade war on steroids.
The S&P 500 index up now by 26 points at 3252. That is a gain of 0.8%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 182 points, up 0.6%. NASDAQ up 119 points for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain of 1.3%. The 10-year down 3/32, yield 1.52% right now. Gold is down 0.7%, $15.77 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude dropping 3%. $50.03 did trade below $50 a barrel. Brent $54.31. It is down by 4.1%. China has kick-started a clinical trial to speedily test a drug for the novel coronavirus infection as the nation rushes therapies for those afflicted and scours for vaccines to protect the rest. Remdesivir, a new antiviral drug by Gilead Sciences, is aimed at infectious diseases such as Ebola and SARS. Gilead shares, they are up now by 5.6%. Tesla rallying for a fifth day. It is up by 16.2%. A torrent of good news further boosts investor sentiment. And then after the closing bell, we will be hearing from Google, Alphabet, I should say, the parent of Google, shares up now by 3.1%. Recapping S&P up 27. That's a gain of 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, let's do a little Business Week economics now. Kathleen Hayes, Global Economics and Policy Editor for Bloomberg, and Andrew Husby, U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. We've been talking a fair amount about economics today because Quick Flex, Paul Krugman stopped by a little bit ago, so we got to talk a little bit about his new book.
He talked about the virus.
He did.
He didn't just, blow it off.
He didn't. And, one of the things he talked about was the value-based supply chain and how the world is a little bit different now. What are you hearing, Kathleen Hayes, Global Economics and Policy Editor, about the global approach, reaction to the virus so far?
Because you came in, you're like, did you guys see the Kotak report?
Yeah, about how the Chinese, summing up a lot of different information from very important, publications saying that they've known since early December, et cetera. David Kotak, of course, common advisor. But, look, the Chinese came in with a very strong liquidity symbol overnight. They're expected to do that. And our Bloomberg intelligence team in China is saying it's a sign that the PBOC will follow up with a couple of key rate cuts. We've got this great purchasing managers. Andrew's with us. He's going to be jumping into that. But you know what? It may not reflect fully after, 5 or 6 months, you finally get a big rebound. But you still now have the virus out there. We don't know how bad it's going to get. We don't know how many ports are going to be closed for how long. We don't know what it's going to do to global shipping and global ordering. So, yeah, bonds, in fact, as Charlie just mentioned, you got the 10-year down a little bit, the 30-year up a little bit. No big move with stocks doing a bit better today. In the face of that, we're watching Asian central banks besides the PBOC now down the road for cutting rates. So I think that's another thing that's good for stocks potentially, right?
Right.
And maybe not so good for bonds. Steps are being taken and will be taken, but right now nobody knows for
It's
sure.
a reminder that central banks are stepping in whenever there's any kind of concern and worry about instability within either a country, an economy, or a marketplace in particular, right? Because we did see Chinese stocks mansplaining, lady-splaining down a lot overnight. No, but the central banks are there ready to lend and assist.
Besides unemployment and inflation, a central bank's number one thing is financial stability, preventing financial panics and financial crises.
So come on in,
right.
Andrew.
Yeah, so you mentioned the PMI. This is something we had been looking for a while. We looked for it last month in the wake of the initial stages of the trade deal was coming together, but it didn't happen. You saw some early January regional PMIs really pick up, and now we saw in the ISM, which is the national level manufacturing gauge, a nice jump above 50 for the first time since basically mid-year 2019. So you look at that and you say, is that sustainable? We think as we find a bottom, assuming the virus doesn't get worse and the supply chains don't get impacted further, which is it's an assumption. It's not given what we know and what we don't know. It's a tentative assumption right now. So what we're looking for though is this jump in production to continue, orders to continue, and I think given how weak stuff was at the end of the year, we don't expect a big follow through immediately. We expect the first quarter to still be pretty depressed for manufacturing, and it does continue this theme where the Fed bar to a cut is a lot lower than to a hike.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what and everybody who speaks now, there's going to be several this week. Raphael Bostic, president of the Atlanta Fed, is speaking at 4 p.m. Eastern. I think that the first headline is going to be what they say about the virus, how it looks. I think it was so interesting that Rich Clarida kind of backed up Powell saying no need to do anything yet, although it is too early to know. But it is the number one question. Isn't it interesting how quickly it's gone from, maybe not that big of a deal like SARS, to people going, now we don't know how big of a deal.
I love the stories that came out later that said, we really don't know. Like everybody was shrugging it off. And
stop saying that it's like the thing because it's not.
Right, exactly. Right? And I think that's where we are now.
Yeah, and one of the things we've done, we put out a piece last week, we looked at the Fed transcripts from 2003 when SARS was going on. So there was a lot of discussion under the surface about how it might be impacting growth. But as they were coming through March, April, May of 2003, it didn't appear in the minutes to this meeting, but it was you could argue a factor, whether you lump it in with uncertainty, global growth risks, that did cause the Fed in 2003 to add an insurance cut. So it's not what we're calling for, our Bloomberg Economics, but it's something that will be evolving as the quarter goes on.
And look at how quickly it's kind of filtered through our conversation. Jay Powell was asked about it. We've seen CEOs talk about it a lot. I feel like we even talked about it down ahead of the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, and you do wonder, I mean, just going back to Krugman for a second, I mean, the fact that he feels compelled to write about it, not from a political perspective, but, from a purely economic perspective, and to essentially say, Kathleen, that this time it's different, that this time the supply chains are different, this time global economies are much more
and that's another really simple, powerful point. Supply chains are much more interconnected all over the world. And as one of our Bloomberg Economics pieces said, China's economy is now exponentially larger than it was in 2003. Therefore, whatever feedback it had, whatever impact it exerted on the world is way different. World's second largest economy, supply chains, all of that. So what happens in China, what slows down there, what ripples across Asia. Another one of our stories today on the terminal, on Bloomberg Terminal, was pointing out, we got the phase 1 trade deal. What's that? And we know now the Chinese want concessions. They need concessions on their agricultural purchases. Hey, we just had Brexit, guys. Yeah, okay. I mean, it's just overshadowing everything, it seems.
One of the things that I found interesting that I keep going back to, it's one of these sort of cocktail party nuggets, is the story that we had last week that said Apple buys 50 business class seats a day on this one United route between San Francisco and Shanghai. I mean, that's one company.
Right.
It's obviously a massive company and a really important company, but that just shows you just the person to person.
And think of confidence. Think if you live in China. Do you want to go outside? Do you want to stay in? People, these small and medium-sized manufacturing plants are really important to employment. China needs more than 4.5% growth, right? And that's what some of the forecasts are. They do much better with 6%. They need to have jobs. It's a very tough time for them. And again, second largest economy.
Yep. All right, guys, thank you so much. Kathleen Hayes, Global Economics and Policy Editor. Check her out on Daybreak Asia. Obviously, this is top of the agenda for that program as well. Our team working really hard over there in Asia to sort of just try and keep it all together and keep the news flow going. And Andrew Husby as well, U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics. Coming up,
we're going to talk about the chart of the day, right? We'll have Dave Wilson swing by and get into that. And also Andy Brown of our Bloomberg New Economy. He's got an interesting story really about this new Cold War. So we'll get into that with him in just a moment.
All right, Liz, let's first get back to Bob Moon. He's got World National Headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, 2 people are dead, a third wounded in a shooting at a residence hall at Texas A&M University Commerce. That's about 65 miles northeast of Dallas. A frenzy of last-minute campaigning in Iowa all comes down to tonight. Democratic contender Pete Buttigieg is spinning what his rivals say is inexperience as a mayor into a selling point.
I know there's some ads on TV saying that this is no time to take a risk on anybody new. But I would say at a moment like this, history has taught us we cannot take the risk of meeting a fundamentally new challenge by falling back on the familiar. We can't be afraid.
Many Iowa voters still undecided. We'll bring you special coverage with Bloomberg's David Weston live from Des Moines starting at 10 p.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg Radio. Nobody's really expecting senators to be persuaded by the back-and-forth closing impeachment arguments that just now wrapped up on Capitol Hill. A final vote for acquittal, all but certain come Wednesday afternoon. But that vote is not the final word. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman is live on Capitol Hill. Irv.
Bob, the members of the House took turns laying out the case they'd made of President Trump pressuring Ukraine to investigate the Bidens and withholding needed military aid until they obliged. This was Representative Hakeem Jeffries.
If the Senate chooses to acquit, then America is in the wilderness. If the Senate chooses to normalize lawlessness, to normalize corruption, to normalize presidential abuse of power, then America is in the wilderness.
Since the Senate vote is predictable, the argument is directed as much to voters in November as to senators who heard it at great length already, Bob.
Irv Chapman Live, Global News 24 hours a day. I'm Bob Moon.
Europe, stability, and constant evolution. Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Your job is going to be even more important, I'd argue.
Experience with consistent information.
Would it be a policy mistake if global central banks signaled a more dovish stance?
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
So how do you tackle that? What's your mechanism?
Weekdays at 1 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
Okay, kids, Dad's gonna teach you how to dance. First, spread your feet apart. Then, pump your knee, nod your head, shake your hips, and bite your lip ever so slightly. Now, with one hand in the air, point at people with the other hand. I call that the rock star.
Dance like a dad. It's a great way to make a moment with your kids.
Now, make a face like it just smells something bad.
Visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Whatever job you're searching for, you can find it on LinkedIn. First jobs, flexible jobs, keep me out the cold jobs, advertising jobs, accounting jobs, HR, PR, even ER jobs, East London jobs, West London jobs, extra hour in bed jobs, startup jobs, late start jobs, get home in the daylight jobs, banking jobs, building jobs, flexible working on a Friday jobs, or even voiceover jobs, which is how I ended up recording this ad. Search millions of jobs on LinkedIn and find one meant for you.
Finding your perfect new home can be tough. So if you keep missing out,
it's time to search at On the Market.
There are thousands of new properties to buy or rent every month at onthemarket.com. 24 hours or more before they're on Rightmove or Zoopla.
On the Market.
See them first. Set up a property alert today.
Search onthemarket.com to find your perfect home.
If you're in the market, search onthemarket.com. See onthemarket.com/new and exclusive. Agents specify exclusivity.
This is not a cat. This is not a rocket. And this is not a sale. That's right. At Smarty Mobile, we're not having a sale. While others are slashing prices, we're introducing our best ever new plans. Take our new 30 gig data SIM for just £10 a month. With unlimited calls and texts and no speed restrictions, credit checks or contract tying you down, why shop around? New plans, great value. Now that's Smarty. Grab yours today. Search Smarty Mobile. See smarty.co.uk for terms.
The UK has now left the EU, and we're in a transition period until the end of the year. Throughout this period, the government will be forging new partnerships with the EU and the rest of the world. This could lead to new arrangements for trade, travel, and business. To find out about the changes and how they might affect you, go to gov.uk/transition.
Welcome to Cathay Island. We hope you've enjoyed flying Cathay Airways. Oh, and Cathay, congratulations on the Euro Millions win.
In this Tuesday's Euro Millions, there are 20 UK millionaires guaranteed. That's dream come true money. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Estimated jackpot. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
5 is in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA on demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
Along the goal line, Martin scores! He takes it home!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
Here's Pietrangelo, he scores!
And you can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium.
Gonna move, hit a shot, he scores!
From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is an update on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing, but we are well off our session highs. Let's head right over to the first word breaking news desk for today's afternoon call. And here he is, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. U.S. stocks are rebounding after Friday's sell-off, with the Dow currently up 177 points. S&Ps are up 26, while the NASDAQ climbs by 1.3%. The U.S. 10-year yield at 1.52%, gold trading lower by 12. Small caps are higher by 10 points, and 10 of the main 11 S&P sectors also trading higher, led by gains in materials and tech. Only energy fell. Nasdaq Biotechs jumped 2%. Transports gained 43. Semis are up 1.3%, and the VIX is down by 5%. Leaders to the upside in the Dow: Nike, Microsoft, and IBM, while ExxonMobil fell 2.7% and led to the downside. After earnings, food company Cisco revenue missed estimates. Shares are down 7%, and Tesla soared again, rose as much as 21%. That's the biggest one-day gain since 2013. Wrapping things up, Google reports after the bell. Live from the first breaking news desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie.
All right, hi, thank you very much, Mr. Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over your Bloomberg type squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks a lot. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week here on a Monday afternoon. Andy Brown with us, editorial director for Bloomberg New Economy. His column, I have to say, is a must-read every week, especially at a time where we are fascinated and have to be with the nexus of the U.S. and China in the broader global economy. And that really took an interesting turn when it comes to Huawei recently, with a country with which the United States has traditionally had a quote-unquote special relationship. Got a little less special, or a little more complicated, to say the least. Andy, he's here with us in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio, talking about Boris Johnson, newly freed up, newly Brexited, and he's saying, Huawei, yeah, we'll do a deal with you. Donald Trump, sorry about that.
Exactly. The relationship is now a little bit less special. It was only a few years ago under the Cameron government that the British were talking about the golden age of relations between the United Kingdom and China, and that certainly had a bearing on the outcome of this decision. Look, this is really, I think, a historical turning point. The White House was issuing these warnings about Huawei in almost, apocalyptic terms, right? The message to friends, to allies was, if you go with Huawei, you must be mad, right? So Matt Pottinger, who runs China at National Security Council, used a Cold War analogy. He said, can you imagine in the middle of the Cold War, Reagan and Thatcher getting together and say, hey, how about this for an idea? Let's get the KGB to build our comms networks and get a cut price on the deal, right?
Crazy.
crazy, right? So, and Britain takes all this on board. Boris Johnson hears this and was like, yeah, we get it. We understand. Huawei is a risk. We're only going to let them, but we're going to let them in, right? And I think this idea that, I mean, it was Henry Kissinger at our New Economy Forum just a few months ago was warning that we are in the foothills of a new Cold War. Well, you know, maybe we're always going to remain in the foothills because it's really going to be incredibly difficult for the United States to put together a coalition of friends and allies to have a Cold War with China. The world is not working that way anymore.
Right.
If it ever did.
Right. Limiting the flow of technology in and out of China. It can't, it's not possible at this point.
So the UK is saying several things. First of all, it's too expensive. They already have Huawei gear embedded in their 3G, 4G network. So if they're going to go with Huawei on 5G, it means they have to rip all that out, and then they're going to have to pay more for presumably Ericsson or Nokia networks. Plus, and here's the killer thing, it's going to offend China. If you're the United States, you can take on China. You can stand up to China. We've seen that, right? Donald Trump, the White House, take on China. We're going to have a trade war with China. If you're the UK, you cannot do that. They need a trade deal with China just as they need a trade deal with the United States. Now they're out of the EU. Now you imagine this. This is Britain. This is, as you say, the special relationship, America's closest ally. If you are a Singapore or a Philippines or a smaller, weaker country, more distant from the United States, you're looking at this and you're also weighing your alliances, your allegiances, and which way you're going to go if you're going to be asked to choose.
I also thought it was interesting, Andy, in your column, how you also wrote about Britain really knowing Huawei better than anyone else, that they have really looked at this company from a bunch of different angles, correct?
They've ripped apart all the software. They haven't found anything in the software. In fact, nobody has any hard evidence that Huawei has backdoors or that it is, actively planning sabotage or surveillance. The issue really is its relationship with the Chinese state. Would Huawei, if asked, act on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party? And Huawei will say definitively no. The rest of the world, much of the rest of the world says definitively, are you kidding? Right. Of course they would, right?
Skeptical.
And so while we have you, in just a couple minutes we have left, I have to ask you about the coronavirus and certainly the political implications of it, especially in China, because you wrote about this last week, and it feels like this whole notion of the impact on President Xi especially is being talked about a lot now. Well, remind us what you think.
So, we have a top-down system in China, and Xi Jinping has concentrated power in his hands beyond any leader since Chairman Mao. And it means that, he ultimately is responsible for this. The story that's been coming out has been the initial cover-up, that China missed early opportunities. And why is this? Why did lower-level officials not kick it up? Were they afraid to kick it up because it was too politically sensitive? Were they sitting on their hands, waiting for the Chinese leadership to make a decision up in Beijing and then hand it down? Certainly, I think you can say this without any doubt, is that a free media in China would have picked up on these cases and would have had it out there in the public view and in the public mind way earlier on, which would have allowed for a more rapid response.
And forgive me, Andy, because I'm going to ask you to be quick, 30 seconds. So is President Xi at risk at all? You know this, country better than most.
It really depends on how this whole coronavirus plays out. I mean, there's just so much about it we don't know. I mean, if it all burns out in the next few weeks, look, the government is also doing a great job. They're building hospitals. Right. They've taken decisive action. So, it's a central government that appears to be in control and in command. I think the picture looks very different if this drags on for months, really knocks the Chinese economy, really knocks employment, and does lasting damage to, salaries and livelihoods.
All right. We're going to be talking a lot more to you about this, we know, in the coming weeks. Andy Brown, thank you so much. Editorial Director for Bloomberg New Economy, here with us in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks remain higher in the final hour, but fears of the coronavirus continue to keep traders cautious. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 178, the S&P 500 up 26, the Nasdaq Composite up 121. Disney will bring the wildly popular musical Hamilton to the big screen next year. The movie will be filmed on stage in New York, according to the musical's creator and actor Lin-Manuel Miranda. Disney paid $75 million for the rights. Apple's TV Plus may be a rare miss for the company. Bernstein Research says fewer than 10 million subscribers have opted for their free 12-month trial, less than 10% of eligible customers. Limited content is said to be a problem. Antitrust officials are suing to block the maker of Schick razors and blades from acquiring Harry's, saying it would reduce competition. The challenge jeopardizes plans by Edgewell Personal Care to revamp the Schick brand. Larry Kofsky, Bloomberg Radio.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions.
5 is in. What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Ready for this! Scores! On the goal line, Marshawn scores!
Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
You can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today. Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Upgrade to TuneIn Premium and get over 45 commercial-free music stations. You'll also get live commercial-free news, plus live play-by-play games from NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June. featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA On Demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
To be the best we can be. Maybe that's why we receive top marks in every category of the J.D. Power 2019 Advisor Satisfaction Survey. They named us number 1 in client support, number 1 in firm leadership, number 1 in operational support, number 1 in compensation, number 1 in professional development support, and number 1 in technology support. Ready to partner with the best? Call Commonwealth at 866-462-3638 or visit commonwealth.com and feel the power. Member FINRA-SIPC, a registered investment advisor. For 2019 J.D. Power award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Experts like to be part of Bloomberg surveillance.
What does the new Europe look like?
For the same reason we're recommending it to you.
Everything you thought would happen is happening.
Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Coming up, we're going to check in with Dave Wilson. He's got his chart of the day. He gave us a little bit of a preview earlier, very on the news.
He did. In fact, it's going to be one of the stocks we're talking about a little bit later on, so we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's get back to your top business stories. A check on trading with Charlie Pellet.
And I thank you very much, Carol Master. We are looking at an update here on Wall Street with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing. We've got 28 minutes to go ahead of that closing bell, with the Dow now up by 214 points. That is a gain of about 0.8%. Your S&P 500 index up by 30 points. That is a gain of 0.9%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index now up by 134 points. For NASDAQ, that is a gain of just about 1.5%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds, looking at a yield right now of 1.52%. Gold is down gold is down 0.8%, 15.76 the ounce. Big move today for West Texas Intermediate crude oil, traded here in New York. WTI down 2.8% right now, 50.12 a barrel. And we have got Brent crude, the global benchmark, lower by 4% right now. Brent is at 54.34. So U.S. stocks rebounding from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. Mickey Levy is chief economist for the U.S. and Asia at Berenberg Capital Markets.
I think this is a major body blow to China that is going to have a lingering impact on their economy. And of course, their official economic data really don't, add up to what's happening in reality.
It'll be another busy week for earnings, specifically after the bell. Today, we will be hearing from Alphabet, that, of course, the parent of Google. It will post quarterly results today. Analysts will be watching to see whether advertising growth, coupled with gains in an increasingly important cloud computing business, will be enough to add fuel to a stock that is hovering near records. Alphabet is up by another 3.4%. Got to mention Tesla briefly. Shares surging again today. Tesla is up 17% today, bringing its year-to-date gains to more than 85%. Again, recapping, stocks higher. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing on this back-to-work Monday. S&P up 30, a gain there of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master, along with Jason Kelly in our Interactive Broker Studio, and this is Bloomberg Radio. What is that?
What is happening? Dave Wilson is bringing in some bumping club music? What is that?
Is that like EDM? What is it called? EDM or something? What does that mean?
Are we at a rave, Dave?
Well, I will tell you, the song was posted Friday to the audio site SoundCloud.
Yes, familiar.
Right? It's the second song to be posted there by this particular artist. You may have heard of him. Elon Musk.
Oh, no
well done.
Way.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And very appropriate for your chart of the day.
You bet. I mean, if you look at the way Tesla's shares are going, you might agree with Elon Musk. Don't doubt your vibe. But if you pay attention
That's
to
the name of the song, Don't Doubt Your Vibe.
Don't doubt your vibe.
And yours spelled U-R.
Yeah, because it's trendy.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you paid attention to what Aswat the Motorin over at NYU was saying, you would not say don't doubt your vibe, but doubt your valuation. And he has an interesting story to tell because he actually bought shares of Tesla last June when they were trading, at their lows. I mean, he figured $180 a share. He'd set his price. It was a little bit lower than his valuation of the company at the time. He ended up buying the stock, more than tripling his money over the space of 7 months and change. Last week, he sold out. And why did he do that? Well, he explained his process in a post on his Musings on Markets blog. And the way he looked at Tesla, he was valuing the company at $427 a share. He got $640 for his stake. Now, he figured the price might go even higher, and certainly it has today. But the way he put it basically comes down to momentum rather than valuation pushing Tesla higher. So I'm sure that's how he would explain what was going on today with now almost 19% gain in the stock. So if you want to see this chart, folks, send me an email. I'll get it to you along with the explanation that goes with it and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
But if you're a smart investor, we talked with Ross Gerber, right, who owns the car, also owns shares of Tesla. Like, he's managing money for other folks. There's a point where, because the share price has gone up so much, that you do take some money. I hate to use this expression, take some money off the table, but you do, because it's the smart thing to do. And either it's gotten too expensive and you've made a really decent return on your investment.
Yeah, in fact, it was interesting. DeMotorin, in this post, he talks about how he wished that his valuation would let him hold it for a few more months, so that way it would be a long-term capital gain when he sold it, as opposed to a short-term gain, which gets a higher tax rate.
That's interesting.
What do you have to, how long do you have to hold it for?
1 year.
1 year.
Yeah.
So a little bit longer.
So 7 months and change was all he got. So it's interesting to sort of see this kind of back and forth, and it really does tell you something about what's happened to Tesla stock in the interim.
And so, does Tesla remind you of anything that you've seen in your years looking at the markets? I mean, is this taking us back to sort of .com fever? Like, what is it? Does it evoke anything for you, Dave?
Yeah, .com era is probably the closest analogy. The challenge is figuring out to what extent this is hype and what extent it's reality, which was to some extent what you were dealing with some of the biggest companies back then. You think about a Cisco Systems or even a Microsoft. The whole idea that, their shares jumped up because, the internet was going to be like the be all and end all of everything, and it had this limitless potential. Now, I mean, you can see that with Tesla as far as, sort of owning the electric car market. That potential is there, and certainly it's an area that's growing. But whether, in the end, the business is going to justify the valuation given to the stock is very much an open question.
Right.
We know that 20 years ago, I mean, you certainly saw stocks move up and then come crashing to the ground, and in some cases never get back to where they were during those .com years. So, there's a lot to look forward to here.
Well, and you have to see if, in terms of the growth rates, I'm looking at the FA page on the Bloomberg, whether or not the revenue growth, some of the forecasts that are out there, and we're looking at, 47% quarter-over-quarter growth coming up, like whether or not it hits those targets, then it can maybe justify some of those valuations. But
yeah, and the whole idea, if you look at the analyst numbers, that they're anticipating that Tesla will be profitable quarter by quarter now. You look back the last couple of years, they had first and second quarter losses, and then delivered third quarter profits, and then we'll see about this past fourth quarter. That'll be certainly a set of results to watch for. But when you put it all together, I mean, you can sort of understand what's behind it. The only question becomes whether it's a bit too much.
Stock's up 83% this year. Almost 18% of the outstanding float is being shorted.
And we're going to talk about Tesla with our next guest, Sean Cruz over at TD Ameritrade. He says Tesla swinging a hot bat, but caution helmet on. So he seems to agree. Dave Wilson, thank you so much. We'll see you a bit later. Bob Moon is here with World National Headlines. Hey, Bob.
Jason, President Trump's lawyers took their final turn to persuade the Senate and the voting public that the president has acted only in the national interest, and they made an appeal for bipartisanship. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman reports from Capitol Hill.
Kenneth Starr said the House didn't follow the rule book and play fair in their rush to impeach President Trump.
What is before this court rise to the level of a high crime or a misdemeanor? One so grave and so serious to tell the American people your vote in the last election is hereby declared null and void.
Starr, who prosecuted President Bill Clinton, noted that 31 House Democrats voted against Clinton, while the Democrats this time persuaded not one House Republican to oppose President Trump. On Capitol Hill, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
Those closing arguments wrapped up in the past hour. A final impeachment vote is likely on Wednesday. Chinese health authorities report 362 people have now died from the coronavirus outbreak. More than 17,200 people there have been sickened. The country's most prominent political talk show host, Rush Limbaugh, says he's been diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. The influential conservative icon made the announcement on his radio show today.
There are going to be days that I'm not going to be able to be here because I'm undergoing treatment or I'm reacting to treatment.
Limbaugh is 69 years old. He had renewed a long-term contract with Premier Radio Networks, part of iHeartMedia, just weeks ago. He's been in national syndication for 31 years. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. I'm Bob Moon.
Vattel Shah is Senior Project Engineer at Mott MacDonald, a global engineering consultancy with more than 16,000 employees. He earned his PhD at New Jersey Institute of Technology, and as an adjunct professor is helping NJIT students explore emerging technologies.
My focus is renewable markets, emerging technologies, the idea of floating cities. What are we doing to develop that? What will happen to the city on the water? Well, you're going to have waves hitting it. You're going to have solar. How are you going to develop plants? How are you going to develop vegetation and farming? That sort of thought process happens at NJIT. We actually plan out what will the city look like. How do we develop that? So in 10 years, we're actually ready to take on those challenges when we have our first development in the water. NJIT also has been doing a lot of work in self-healing materials. So taking the polymers and the new material that we have in our material sciences departments and putting them into things like concrete, things like steel, reinforcing our soil.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Rich is just a really good guy. The term good egg isn't enough to describe him. He's also certified organic and free range. Rich puts the cap back on everything. The toothpaste, the olive oil, the shampoo, everything. He lets his 10-year-old nephew beat him at virtual tennis, even though he can straight up slay his 10-year-old nephew in virtual tennis. When the toilet paper is running low, Rich replaces the roll on the actual holder, not just on the back of the toilet. Rich is texting and driving. Rich? No. What are you doing, Rich? I was just telling everyone how great you are. Texting and driving makes good people look bad. Visit StopTextStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council. Are you interested?
5 is in! What a run! Touchdown, Kansas City!
Congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs on winning their first Super Bowl in 50 years and second in franchise history.
50, Watkins, 10, chase to the 5, into the end zone, touchdown! That may be all she wrote!
While the NFL's 100th season may be over, football never stops on TuneIn. Search NFL Podcast to stay current with all the off-season wheeling and dealing. And get ready for the 2020 NFL Draft in April.
Heading for the net, scores! On the goal line, Marshawn scores! A Hockey fans, the 2019-20 NHL season is here.
And tucks it home!
And with this team, it's really fun to be a part of a team like that.
You can hear the action live on TuneIn Premium. From regular season action to the All-Star Game and through the Stanley Cup in June. Hear the home and away call for every game, for every team live. At home or on the go, never miss a game with the NHL on TuneIn Premium.
Upgrade today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Go courtside with the NBA on TuneIn. With the NBA on TuneIn, hear your favorite team and players take on their biggest rivals during the biggest games throughout the year, including regular season showdowns, the 2020 All-Star Game, and the NBA Finals in June, featuring the home and away calls for all 30 teams. Plus, with the NBA on demand, relive the best moments of the season by listening to the past games in their entirety. Listen to the NBA all season long on TuneIn.
This is not a commercial. This is a reminder. With TuneIn Premium, you could be listening to more music commercial-free. Get over 45 commercial-free music stations. Visit TuneIn.com/premium to upgrade.
A lot of people aren't aware that TuneIn lets you listen to the same terrestrial stations that you pick up on your FM AM dial, except you can hear them from anywhere. To see all the stations broadcasting in your area, find the local radio section on the home screen. Keep it local with TuneIn.
Hey, NFL fan, can't watch the game? Can't be there? No biggie. With your TuneIn Premium membership, you already have an all-access pass to every team and every game in the league. Amazing, right?
Steps up, floats it towards, at the goal line, it's intercepted!
Listen live as the action unfolds or on demand when you can. Anytime, anywhere, all season long.
Right side, it is caught. It is in for the right side for the touchdown.
Search NFL today.
Want to hear about the latest and greatest things to listen to on TuneIn? For reminders of the biggest live sports games, debates, and breaking news stories, follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay connected with the audio that matters to you.
Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible technology choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step. From onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We've got 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell with the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. They are all pushing higher right now. A 172-point jump in the Dow, up 0.6%. You recall just about this time last week on Friday, we did have the Dow down by roughly 600 points. But stocks rebounding from the worst week in 6 months as investors speculate efforts to contain the coronavirus will minimize lasting damage to the global economy. S&P up 25. That's a gain of 0.8% right now. NASDAQ is pushing higher by 121 points, up 1.3%. 10-year down 5/30 seconds with a yield there of 1.52%. We've got gold down 0.8% right now, 15.76 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude tumbling 3%. $50.01 for a barrel now of WTI crude. Recapping, we've got stocks higher. Google, Alphabet reporting after the closing bell. Alphabet up by 3.3%. S&P up 24, up by 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home? Honey, please, I'll do the driving. Drive on. Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby. This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, it's time now for the Drive to the Close on an update on the market to bounce back from Friday. What to make of it? All of these different things that we've been trying to synthesize. We're going to put all those questions to Sean Cruz, manager of trader strategy at TD Ameritrade. He joins us on the phone from Jersey City, New Jersey. Sean, great to have you back with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so what a difference, I guess 72 hours makes to some extent with the market, because had we talked to you on Friday when we were in Miami, sort of half watching Super Bowl preparation and half watching a meltdown, it felt very different. What do you make of the trade today?
I think markets are really just sort of pulling risk off the table going into the long weekend. We had quite a few items coming out over the weekend when markets are closed that they probably were just sitting by and saying, when things are open again and I can respond to this information as it comes out, that's when I want to have some of that risk on the table. And so we had a lot of potential news that could have come out about the coronavirus. You also had the impeachment trial going on in Capitol Hill. And we also were looking forward to the Shanghai markets finally reopening Monday, and then keep in mind, those markets were going to open actually Sunday evening before we actually open here Monday morning. So I think there was just a lot that could potentially come out over the weekend where there was just really no one wanted to step up and take risk, and that's why you just saw this gradual grind lower throughout the session on Friday, but that money looks like it's going back to work today.
Yeah, exactly. And I am curious where you're seeing people put money to work. Despite all these things, Sean, that we're worried about, people are still buying and selling stocks pretty aggressively, it seems like.
They are, and we see that, not only in our client base, but also if you just look at metrics for retail investors across the industry. But what we see is that during earnings season, there's a lot of individual stocks that get traded. We see activity pick up in some of those names that are coming out and reporting. And what's interesting is really the behavior. So last week, we actually saw a lot of selling in Amazon as it gapped higher, and that was just clients lightening up those positions, maybe taking some profits. And they were also doing it a little bit in Tesla as well. So they were sort of selling into that strength. And then on the flip side of that, when Facebook sold off post earnings, we actually saw a little bit of buying interest in that name. So that's kind of the ebb and flow for how we see our active trader clients trading around earnings, specific names, and sort of managing their risk levels. And that is scaling in on pullbacks and then sort of taking profits and managing their exposure on strong rallies.
So tell me, Amazon, Tesla, were people buying that big time?
There was quite a bit of interest in Amazon and Tesla throughout the month